Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Brian Cohey. A normal morning in a quiet town is suddenly shattered by the horrific discovery of the dismembered body of an unknown victim hidden in a family room. What led to this inhuman act? Where is the line between mental instability and intentional crime? These questions have turned the case into a long-lasting nightmare in the public mind. Brian Cohey was born on January 10, 2002, in Grand Junction, Colorado, USA. He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder at a young age. In high school, Brian began to show antisocial behavior, becoming an outsider who often clashed with other students, causing them discomfort. He enjoyed humiliating other children and spent a lot of time online, where he bullied his chat partners. This behavior occurred both on social media and at school. It worsened over the years. In the 11th grade, Brian's parents were called to school again because the principal reported that students and teachers felt unsafe around him. Brian frequently teased, insulted his classmates, leading to fights. However, his parents believed these concerns were exaggerated. In 2018, Brian got into legal trouble for the first time when he was arrested for assault after using a homemade weapon to attack another student, causing serious injuries. As a result, he was suspended from school. In 2019, Brian faced similar issues again when he triggered a panic attack in another student with post-traumatic stress disorder. Brian deliberately targeted this student without regard for the consequences. That same year, he was suspended once more for making inappropriate comments toward female students. Throughout this time, Brian displayed an obsession with cruelty and violence, particularly towards serial killers. Brian openly idolized the notorious serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, and even shared his terrifying passion with his friends. Other students nicknamed him Demir, and Brian was pleased with it. In high school, a teacher discovered a diary in Brian's briefcase that contained detailed statistics about various serial killers. Brian was fascinated by the number of victims, their motives, and the methods they used. He had a penchant for dark humor and often shared gruesome jokes. The teachers called his parents about his behavior. As a result, Brian was transferred to a school for children with special needs. His parents thought his behavior stemmed from an aggressive nature. They had previously taken him to a doctor to explore ways to address his troubling behavior. Medical staff at the center quickly recognized that Brian needed a thorough evaluation to check for potential psychosis. However, he refused to be hospitalized or undergo further testing. He was taking medication for attention deficit disorder and anxiety, but it did little to help him, particularly during this challenging time. Despite his behavior issues, Brian managed to maintain a small group of friends. After high school, they all became outcasts. After graduating from high school, Brian got a job at a local grocery store. Around the same time, his parents divorced. He lived with his mother, while his father visited him nearly every day. Despite the divorce, his parents remained on good terms. The mother operated a kindergarten, and the father started a small business making life jackets. Although the parents had enough money to support their son, it did not help improve Brian's situation. Early in the morning on February 28, 2021, police received a strange call from a boat station near the Colorado River, where the father of Brian worked. Brian had gotten his car stuck in the mud on the riverbank, and the vehicle was subsequently pulled into the water. It fell from a steep bank and sank a few meters deep. By the time the police arrived, Brian was already there with his parents, whom he had called for help. There were some caring people on the pier who helped Brian warm up. The police sought to understand how and why Brian ended up in this situation at night. He claimed he was looking for privacy and a peaceful place to be himself. However, the police found his story hard to believe. They questioned how he could have deliberately driven the car backwards towards the water, and then, when he tried to leave, causing the vehicle to roll into the river. Although Brian managed to escape from the sinking car, he was completely drenched and at risk of hypothermia. As it turned out, he had arrived there late in the evening and stayed until dawn. It was odd that a young man his age was only engaged in such activities. His parents told the police that he had developmental disabilities, which made his behavior different from others. Brian wanted to call for help because it was February and cold. He was soaked and didn't know how to get home. Unfortunately, his mobile phone had died. After getting out of the car, Brian went to the road, hoping to get help from passing drivers, but no cars were in sight. After 5 minutes, a man and his son stopped to offer assistance. They gave him a mobile phone, allowing Brian to call the police and his parents to keep warm. The man invited Brian to sit in their car and provided him with support. Brian was clearly distressed about the situation, fearing his parents would be upset when they found out he had sunk the car. The unusual incident made the police chuckle. They didn't pay much attention to the submerged car. Meanwhile, Brian's parents were on the pier, trying to figure out how to retrieve the vehicle from the water. Brian's father owned a business nearby and was familiar with the area. He realized that he would need specialized equipment to solve the problem because the shore was very steep. Unfortunately, it was too early to call a tow truck, and Brian was cold and at risk of hypothermia. They called several tow truck companies until they finally found a free vehicle. All this was written off as a funny absurdity. The police facilitated the family so that the parents could change clothes and let their son warm up. The officers then went back to the boat dock to help tow the car. However, their laughter quickly turned to concern when the car was on dry land, as they noticed something that looked like blood dripping from it. One officer promptly contacted the boy's father to alert them that Brian might be hurt. He could be unaware of his injury because of hypothermia. The vehicles were returned to the family without any inspection or collection of blood samples by the detectives. They not confirm whether the liquid they found was blood or something else. It simply resembled blood in color. Fortunately, Brian was unharmed, and the incident was dismissed as an accident. However, the following day, on March 1, police began to realize their oversight. A woman named Monique called 911 to report that a man named Warren Barnes was missing. Monique owned a wedding shop near the place where Warren frequently rested. They had formed a friendship because he loved to read and often sat in the same spot nearby. Warren was homeless, but was known for being pleasant and calm. Monique often spoke with him and would give him small jobs to help him earn money for food and water. Warren was well known in the city, especially for his passion for reading. People regarded him as friendly, intelligent, and well-read. Although Warren never shared the details of why he was homeless, those around him understood that he had faced significant challenges in life. On March 1, Monique stated that she last saw Warren on February 27 around 5:00 a.m. He would often come to the store before it opened, chat with her, drink coffee, and receive his tasks for the day. They had planned to meet the next day, but he never arrived. Concerned, Monique reported the situation to the police on February 28 after discovering that Warren's wallet had been found at the boat station, which had her phone number written in it. The police reached out to her to return the wallet, which raised her concerns. Warren had always been responsible and took his job seriously. During their 2 years of working together, he had never been late or missed a day, except for 2 occasions when he had informed her in advance about his absence. She found it odd that the wallet was discovered at the boat station, especially since Warren did not own a car and had no reason to be there. The location was quite far from where he lived, taking about an hour and a half to reach. This made her think that something might have happened to her friend and assistant. She provided detectives with a single photograph of Warren, taken several years before he disappeared. Coincidentally, the wallet was found by Brian's father, whose business was located near the boat station. It was discovered in Brian's car, immediately after the vehicles were towed. When his father asked Brian about the wallet, he said he had found it at the station and intended to return it to its owner, but he had forgotten due to the events of the previous day. However, his parents didn't believe him because they also found latex gloves and a large kitchen knife with suspicious blood-like stains. They were aware of their son's unusual behavior and couldn't understand why he would take someone else's wallet. While Brian was attending a party with his group of friends, the horrifying moment came. Terry, Brian's mother, found a human head hidden in a large plastic bag in Brian's closet. There was another similar bag, but she couldn't bring herself to open it and check what was inside. Instead, she placed both bags in the kitchen sink and immediately called her ex-husband, convinced that their son had killed. His parents contacted Brian and asked him to come home right away. They remained calm and didn't mention what they had found in his room. The father told Brian that he needed to retrieve the keys to the drowned car, and Brian, not suspecting anything, left the party. When he arrived at his home, several police officers had already been called and were on the scene. They quickly found he standing on the street in front of Brian's house. The officers asked him why his parents were worried enough to call the police. Brian calmly explained that they had likely discovered a severed human head and hands in his closet, and he then confessed to the murder. Brian did not resist arrest and was cooperative. He willingly got into the police car and went to the station for questioning without being handcuffed. He appeared cheerful and seemed oddly pleased with the situation. In contrast, Terry was in a state of hysteria. Her ex-husband tried desperately to comfort her, as she struggled to accept that their son was now a murderer. After Brian arrived at the police station, one of the detectives stayed behind to speak with his parents. They recounted the events of the past 24 hours, including the situation with the car and wallet. According to his father, Terry was skeptical of Brian's explanation about the wallet, which prompted her to check his room for anything suspicious. She had a nagging feeling and ultimately made this horrifying discovery. He claimed he discovered a wallet in a car, which contained Warren's ID and Monique's phone number. He quickly reached out to Monique, who was connected to the missing man, hoping to return the wallet. During this conversation, he learned that Warren hadn't shown up for work and that there was a search underway for him, while Brian dismissed any alarming thoughts. His parents spoke with him, but he offered various excuses. Brian remained unusually calm, prompting the police to ask him basic questions to assess his mental and physical state. His demeanor was striking. He appeared unconcerned about his actions. He provided a detailed account of events, sometimes speaking with a sense of pride and making inappropriate jokes. According to him, on the evening of February 27, he was driving and noted that he was in a very troubled state of mind, hearing voices that urged him to find a victim. Around 11 p.m., he stopped under a bridge near the sheriff's office, where he decided to rest. He thought it was a suitable place and proceeded to put on 3 layers of gloves, wear the mask, and took a knife. Brian went outside, removed the tarpaulin, and without warning, began to strike Warren in the head and neck. Warren tried to defend himself and repeatedly asked, "Why are you doing this?" Despite his pleas, Brian continued to hit him. Brian estimated that he inflicted 30 to 40 stab wounds before stopping. Throughout the attack, Brian repeatedly said "dirty," "smelly," expressing his disgust for the victim. By the end of the assault, Warren showed no signs of life. Brian noted that he was sweating but was surprised at how easy it was to kill someone. When he finished, the victim's head was practically separated from the body. Next, he decided to explore the insides, so he opened the abdominal cavity. Brian then cut off the victim's hands and finally victim's head. He made a long cut from ear to ear, leaving a horrifying mark on the victim's mouth. Brian had difficulty recalling all the atrocities and details of the crime scene. much of which was later deleted from his phone. However, experts managed to recover these images, revealing horrifying details of the senseless murder. Brian placed the head into a separate bag. He then loaded everything into the trunk of his car and drove home. Once there, he stored the remains in the closet, cleaned the knife, and washed his clothes. According to his confession, during the act, he made animal sounds and growled. Many people from his life later confirmed they had noticed similar behavior in him before. Brian stated that he felt no remorse or pity, which was clearly a demonstration of his indifference. In fact, he took pride in emulating his idols. Throughout most of the interrogation, Brian smiled. The investigators were horrified by the details of the crime and the enthusiasm with which Brian recounted them. It was as if he wanted to remember every aspect of the murder, aiming for as a maniac. He even drew a rough map of the bridge and the crime scene from above. Eventually, the investigators realized he was reliving the murder in his mind, which seemed to give him immense satisfaction. During the attack, he accidentally tore one of his gloves, but he only noticed it later. Wanting to avoid capture, he returned to the crime scene and took Warren's body. He then headed to the coast and the boat dock, but after throwing the body into the water, his car got stuck in the wet ground and slid into the river. As a result, he had to seek help. After the crime became public, police conducted a thorough examination of Brian's car and discovered many more bloodstains than they had initially found. However, this evidence was no longer so important since the investigators had in their hands the parts of Warren's body, as well as a confession which was recorded and documented throughout. During his interrogation, Brian not only smiled, but also made cruel jokes about his victim. His parents had often heard his dark humor, but never suspected he was capable of such violence. Terry was aware of her son's fascination with serial killers, but she didn't fully take his obsession seriously. Wanting to guide his intense interest in a positive direction, she gave him a book about forensic science and murder investigations. She hoped this would inspire him to become a successful investigator instead of being consumed by his fascination. Unfortunately, her efforts were in vain. Instead of guiding him away from harm, they ultimately helped him prepare for the murder of a homeless man. After the interrogation, the police spoke with Brian's friend, Keelan, who had spent time with him on the day of his arrest. Keelan had known Brian since 9th grade and described him as a very secretive person who enjoyed making provocative jokes and dark humor. Just before the crime, Brian confided in her that he planned to kill a homeless person, thinking no one would care to look for that person. However, Keelan took this as joke. Brian and his friends shared love for humor, and his friends do not take Brian's violent thoughts seriously. Brian's parents also paid little attention to his behavior at school and believed that teachers were unfairly criticizing him. At that time, concerned for their safety, the teachers held a meeting to discuss Brian's behavior. Brian's parents agreed to monitor him more closely after he expressed admiration for the criminals. When the police discovered Brian's diary, which contained statistics on serial killers, they uncovered his criminal plan. It out to be a plan according to which he was supposed to organize a home invasion to kill adults and children, then take valuables and leave the scene of the massacre. Investigators believed he would use a hunting knife and a .45 caliber weapon to carry out his plan. Fortunately, Brian did not have the opportunity to execute his plan. In his diary, he also expressed his belief in natural evil, which he used to justify his future actions. Although law enforcement officers have recovered Warren's body parts, his remains have not yet been fully recovered. The search in the water has continued, but not with enough urgency. The police had strong evidence, including a confession, to charge Brian with murder. During an interview with detectives, Brian admitted that he had been planning the crime for about 6 months. He had thoroughly researched forensic science, knew that the deaths and disappearances of homeless individuals received little attention from investigators. He even considered leaving a body at the crime scene but changed his mind, because influenced by a book his mother had given him. Brian's calculation that homeless people were treated less attentively out to be correct, but chance intervened in the matter, which exposed him. If it hadn't been for a car trouble incident, he might have successfully committed murder. Investigators reviewed his internet activity and found that, in the year before the crime, his online activity increased significantly. He was also dealing with mental health issues, and frequently read about paranoid and schizoid personality disorders. On February 28, the day after the murder, he searched for information on how to delete data from an Android phone and how to dispose of organic waste. Although he had never received any formal diagnoses, he believed he had schizophrenia. He reported experiencing delusions and felt that he was being watched by everyone, even birds. Due to these claims, the police were cautious when interacting with him, concerned that he might attempt to evade responsibility by arguing that he was insane. Brian didn't stop at just one detailed account of a murder. He admitted that on Halloween 2018, he killed a cat. He caught a cat, put it in a bag, and then abused, beat, and trampled it for an extended period before killing it. Afterward, he hid Cat's head in his house. When the remains began to decompose and smell, he simply discarded them. Many people were aware of this incident, yet Brian faced no consequences. During his interrogation, he could not be silenced. He kept sharing the bizarre story after another. He claimed that shortly before the murder, his parents discovered a toolbox in his room containing hammers, shovels, knives, ties, a saw, adhesive tape, and ropes. He openly stated that these items were intended for killing people. His parents urged him to get rid of the tools, warning that they would have to contact the police if he didn't. Even then, they still believed he was incapable of committing a crime. According to his diary entries, he initially planned to find an escort girl to lure, torture, and eventually kill. He thought no one would search for such women or homeless people, but he later changed his mind and considered a different approach. Brian denied finding any satisfaction in his criminal acts. When asked about his motivations, he admitted to admiring killers and being intrigued by their ability to take lives. He believed he was no different from them and wanted to try it himself. During the investigation, authorities discovered Brian's writings in which he expressed his philosophies on life. These writings were just as incriminating as his confessions, revealing the cruelty that dominated his thoughts. In one of his final posts, he expressed regret for the murder, but his concerns seemed more focused on being caught than on the harm he caused an innocent person. In January 2022, the court ordered Brian to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. He showed no remorse for his actions, but was clearly unhappy about being imprisoned for many years. Along with his lawyer, he pursued an insanity defense. However, psychiatrists deemed him competent to stand trial. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including body parts, other evidence, and Brian's own confessions. Throughout the trial, Brian often smiled. Ultimately, he was convicted of first-degree murder and evidence concealment. Brian Cohey received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 13 years. The judge declared this case to be the most horrific and inhumane of his career. The Brian Cohey case is one of the most shocking cases in the community, highlighted by its brutality and alarming signs of psychological instability. Brian, a 19-year-old youth, murdered a homeless man. He was held responsible for his barbaric act with a life sentence in prison, removed a dangerous threat to society. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalia Martinez. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, and she was the youngest daughter in her family. While not much is known about her personality, She had a close relationship with her relatives, especially her older sister, Claudia. Her father was a senior salesman for a large international company that sold household appliances, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was a cheerful and friendly girl. During her teenage years, she formed a close-knit group of friends who supported one another during difficult times. These friends later described her as sociable and able to connect easily with strangers. After graduating from high school, Natalia began spending more time with her friends. They enjoyed going to various parties and eventually expanded their adventures by visiting the beaches of Uruguay for fun. To celebrate her 19th birthday on January 1st, 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a trip to La Paloma, a small resort town, where they stayed for 2 weeks. On January 16th, they traveled to a nearby resort in the city of Reles, where Natalia was delighted to meet her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The Natalia family had a wonderful time enjoying beach activities and were well known in the town, as they frequently visited. They often returned to the same places, making it feel like a second home. On January 18th, Natalia and her sister Claudia decided to drive to Punta del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Reles. They planned to stop at a popular local spa located about halfway between the two towns in the Serra San Antonio area. After their beauty treatment, the girls planned to go to a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. However, as the evening approached, Claudia felt very tired and decided to go home to their parents. Despite this, 19-year-old Natalia Martinez was determined to stick to her plans. She wanted to enjoy herself, so she went with her friends to a popular party at the local nightclub, La Arena Canada, where they stayed until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. At that time, Natalia was talking with a man named Leonardo Roccovan, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They stopped near the exit and continued their conversation. However, Natalia became so engrossed in her discussion with Leonardo that her friends decided to go outside and get into the car they had arrived in, planning to head home together. The girls got tired and got into the car. One of them decided to check on Natalia, but when they returned to the nightclub, they found that Natalia and Leonardo were gone. The friends realized that Natalia could not have left alone or with anyone else without letting them know. Since they did not see her leave, they began to worry. They went up to the second floor, out of the bar, and saw Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The owner was inside the car, and because the windows were tinted, Rosalia and Silva could not see if anyone was in the passenger seat. However, they did notice some movement inside the car. The girls called out to Leonardo to ask about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and mentioned that he had spoken to Natalia briefly before they parted ways. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her afterward or why she didn't return to her friends. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they got into the car and drove to her friends' relatives, who were at the police station, just a 10-minute drive from the club. Rosalia and Silva stopped near the house and honked to get Claudia's attention, trying not to wake the entire family. However, no one responded, so they returned to the club where they last saw Natalia. The girls continued to search for their friend for about 2 hours, but their efforts were unsuccessful. No one knew where she had gone. Around 8 a.m., Silva returned home, exhausted and very worried about her missing friend. Worried about her friend's safety, she decided to tell her parents everything that had happened. She feared something bad might have happened to her friend. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her to rest and that her friend was probably already home. So, she went to bed. Yet, when she woke up at 11 a.m. that same day, her concerns grew stronger. The entire Natalia family started searching for she. They quickly got involved, and her friends went to the club together to find out what happened. Unfortunately, they were still unsuccessful. The club was closed, and no one had any helpful information. They searched the surrounding area for clues but found nothing. Around 5 p.m., Natalia's family and friends arrived at the police station. Maldonado police investigators received several photos, including one of all the girls relaxing at a club that evening. This helped them understand what the missing girl was wearing so they could come up with a description for the search. The police took their statements seriously and began investigating. Initially, the family said that Natalia had been at a party where she may have had too much to drink and left with someone. However, Rosalia and Silva insisted that Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night, as she often denied. They also dismissed the police's suspicions that they had used illegal drugs. Police began a search operation. They first went to the location where Natalia was last seen. The club was open, but there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Police spoke to club employees and learned that a group of 3 young men sitting at a nearby table had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed that the men had been harassing them. Despite this information, police ignored the group of young men and instead focused on the acquaintance with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. It was no surprise that Leonardo immediately became the prime suspect, since he was the last person to see Natalia. However, all of Leonardo's acquaintances described him as a kind and calm person who had never shown any signs of cruelty before and was incapable of harming anyone. He was a young businessman. That night, his girlfriend waited for him in the car while he was talking to Natalia. After that, he said goodbye to Natalia and returned to the car with his girlfriend. From the car, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and go out onto the porch. From that moment on, Leonardo was distracted by his conversation with his girlfriend and did not see Natalia again. However, he was not worried about her, since he did not notice anything suspicious around. No one was screaming or making noise. Despite the police's suspicions, Leonardo insisted he had nothing to do with Natalia's disappearance. However, the police did not trust him. They needed to conduct a thorough examination of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed he spotted a couple having sex in a car that matched the description on the night she went missing, near a lake by the woods. Police obtained a search warrant for Leonardo's car. During the initial inspection, they found a long, dark hair on the floor of the BMW and sent it for analysis. However, it did not match Natalia. It belonged to someone else. The interior of the car showed no signs of suspicious activity, no blood, or evidence of a struggle. Police speculated that Leonardo had cleaned the car shortly after Natalia Martinez disappeared, which would explain the clean condition of the car. Police used this detail as part of the evidence against Leonardo. However, they still lacked the evidence to arrest him. On January 22nd, a passerby driving on the outskirts of Polis discovered several items on the roadside. Among them were a woman's handbag containing a wallet and a pair of women's shoes. The most crucial piece of evidence was linked to Natalia Martinez, a case that was currently receiving significant media attention. Recognizing the situation, the witness promptly contacted the police. Unfortunately, the media coverage also led to the spread of various rumors, which Natalia's family had to repeatedly deny. One such rumor suggested that Natalia was involved with drug dealers, implying that she had become a victim of criminal activities. However, Natalia's father publicly refuted these claims in an official television statement. Despite the situation, rumors continued to spread. Some claimed to have witnessed her being attacked or even murdered. Instead of receiving assistance from the media, police found themselves overwhelmed by numerous false testimonies each day that needed to be verified, complicating the investigation. Meanwhile, the media eagerly reported even the most outrageous theories. The story was considered compelling and attracted many readers, causing journalists to add fuel to the fire of chaos surrounding the case. The rumors about the missing girl were leveraged to boost newspaper sales. Natalia's family endured immense pain following her disappearance. A large-scale search operation was organized, involving many police officers, friends, family members, and hundreds of volunteers. It was quickly determined that there was no evidence of the girl near the nightclub, prompting the search to extend into more distant areas of Uruguay. Ultimately, the entire coast was thoroughly searched. Most of the search operations took place on land, using service dogs, and later involving military and civilian aircraft. The City Fire Brigade also participated in the search and requested that the sewer systems be inspected. However, no traces of Natalia were found there either. By this point, law enforcement had largely concluded that Natalia was deceased, as the likelihood of finding her alive was very low. The critical window for finding missing persons is usually 48 hours. A significant finding occurred when a bone was discovered on the Grande Plateau, but tests revealed it was not human. Although the search had stalled and no new leads had emerged, Natalia's relatives continued their efforts. They remained hopeful that she was alive and being held against her will. In 2000, a female body was discovered in the forest near Lake Yulo. The body was in poor condition and was sent for examination to determine the identity of the deceased. This location was several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, and the clothing found on the body led police to suspect it might belong to the missing Natalia Martinez. After the discovery of the body, police remembered a couple who had been seen having sex in a car near the forest, which drew attention to that area. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy struggled to gather important information because the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. To ensure a thorough examination, 5 forensic experts were called in. They determined that the body belonged to Natalia Martinez. Their overall assessments suggested that she likely did not die of natural causes, as there were faint signs of strangulation on her neck. Although they ruled out poisoning from substances or alcohol, they could not find evidence of physical or sexual violence due to the body's condition. It was noteworthy that the victim was found tied with nylon thread, but it remained unclear whether this occurred before or after her death. Several months later, while the investigation continued, an unexpected development arose. The man who had found her belongings on the roadside was discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. Initially, it appeared that the man had voluntarily chosen to end his life. However, all his relatives insisted that he would never do such a thing. He was a deeply religious man, cherished his life, and loved his family. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, sustained long before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been thrown off. This led police to believe the two cases were linked. But more evidence was needed. The next tragic event involved Natalia's father, Ever Martinez. He had fallen into a deep depression after his daughter's death and the damaging rumors that were circulating about their family. He ended his life at home by shooting himself in the head. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife. The police closed the case after confirming that he had acted alone, a conclusion that the family accepted. For a long time, police struggled to make progress in the investigation into Natalia's murder. However, new information emerged from text messages exchanged with a friend just days before Natalia's death. In these conversations, Natalia mentioned a man she had recently met online. It was later discovered that he was one of the men who had been at the nightclub on the day Natalia went missing. These 3 young men were sitting at a nearby table, and several witnesses had pointed them out from the beginning of the investigation, but this information was overlooked. Police identified all 3 suspects, who were slightly older than Natalia. After interviewing them, the police became even more suspicious of their involvement, as the men contradicted each other in their statements about where they were and what they did during the night and morning of that tragic day. After this, the police interviewed a witness whose identity was kept confidential for her safety. She was the girlfriend of one of the men who had been arrested. Her testimony revealed that a young man in the group, Rodrigo Verghese, was involved in Natalia's murder. At the time, he was 25 years old, and police later stated that he had previously provided false statements. During the interrogation, police recorded phone conversations that implicated the Rodrigo main suspect. They collected DNA samples from him, but these were not helpful for the investigation due to the advanced decomposition of the remains. After that, the police reached out to the friends and relatives of the Rodrigo. A young man was called to testify on June 8, 2010, along with his friends who had been at a nightclub on the night of Natalia's murder. They all claimed they had no involvement in the incident. They stated that after spending the night at the club, they hired a sex worker to join them in their continued festivities. However, they denied any connection to Natalia. Rodrigo, the prime suspect, denied spending time with the murdered woman and claimed he did not know her. However, messages from the girl revealed that they had spoken online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting that Rodrigo had lied. Initial questioning did not turn up any clues, but a day later, police spoke to the young people again in the hope of getting a confession. This time, Rodrigo confessed. He explained that he had met Natalia online, and after chatting for a while, they decided to meet at a club. Unfortunately, their conversation did not go well, and as dawn approached, he suggested they go to another nearby nightclub. Rodrigo misled her. He wanted to be alone with her. During this time, he began to harass her, according to his confession. When she rejected his advances, he seemed to accept it. However, Natalia then suffered an asthma attack, which led to convulsions and ultimately her death, as she did not have her inhaler or any medication with her. Rodrigo was confused and unable to help her. He stated that he panicked during her attack and didn't know what to do, especially when she stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, a short distance from the city. However, after Natalia's death, he decided to dispose of her body to avoid any further repercussions. He headed for the woods, thinking it would be a good place to hide her. There, he tied Natalia up, dragged her deeper into the woods, and covered her body with branches. But this was only part of the story. A witness walking along the beach claimed to have seen a couple having sex, and Natalia's body showed signs of strangulation. It seems that Rodrigo neglected to mention that he had strangled and raped her at the same time. Police were later able to confirm that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved in the incident, so they were released shortly after Rodrigo confessed. Rodrigo was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. After the confession, it appeared that the prosecutor's office would easily prove the Rodrigo's guilt. However, in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo Verghese recanted his confession. He claimed he admitted to the murder under police pressure and insisted he did not commit the crime. This assertion seemed unlikely because his confession included numerous details only the actual killer would know, including the precise location where the girl's body was found. Still, Rodrigo maintained his innocence. Despite the evidence against him, his defense team supported his statement and sought to demonstrate that Rodrigo was not at the club that night. They presented mobile phone data and a statement from his employer confirming that he had been working his usual evening shift that day. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Roccovan, the bookstore owner who was initially the main suspect in the investigation, was called as a key witness for the prosecution. Leonardo testified that during a conversation, he had an argument with a young man. Leonardo identified the young man as Rodrigo. This indicated that Rodrigo was definitely at the nightclub and not at work. Natalia's friends also confirmed that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts, working with the prosecution, provided insights based on the autopsy results. They noted that, due to the typical symptoms of asthma, the girl could not have died from an asthma attack so quickly. While she did experience an asthma attack, it could not have occurred instantaneously. It took several hours. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, which was likely the cause of death. Unfortunately, the experts could not provide further details about the victim's injuries. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution successfully constructed a narrative of the crime, leading to Rodrigo Verghese being found guilty of Natalia Martinez's murder. He received a 9-year prison sentence. However, in February 2011, Rodrigo's lawyer submitted an appeal, claiming that the court's ruling was incorrect and that the prosecution was biased. The lawyer argued that they failed to present a witness to the kidnapping or murder, nor did they provide any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying that the criminal received a lighter sentence than the family had expected. Disappointed by this leniency, Natalia's relatives filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Verghese for causing harm to Natalia's family, holding him responsible for her father's death. Initially, they mentioned that Rodrigo should pay $15 in damages. However, after further discussion, both parties agreed to increase the amount of damages to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the lawyer achieved his goal when Rodrigo, 29, was pardoned after serving only 4 years and 2 months in prison. His release was largely due to his good behavior while in custody. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kathy Krausnack. On February 19, 1982, police were called to the Krausnack family home, where they discovered the body of 29-year-old Kathy Krausnack. An axe was found embedded in her head, the only fatal wound. Earlier, Kathy's 30-year-old husband, James Krausnack, had run into a neighbor's house while holding their 3-year-old daughter. He was covered in blood and appeared distressed, reporting that his wife showed no signs of life. While crying and agitated, he waited for police to arrive. James told police that he had left for work at Kodak around 6:30 a.m., where he worked as an economist. He spent the day completing routine tasks while his wife, Kathy, and their daughter, Sarah, were still asleep at home. Kathy had planned to spend the day with their daughter. When James returned home around 5 p.m., he noticed the garage door open, the kitchen window broken, and the glass door between the garage and the house shattered. Realizing something was wrong, he went inside and found his wife lying on the bed. He was shocked and momentarily unable to speak. He then noticed his 3-year-old daughter lying next to the bed, unharmed. To ensure her safety, James took his daughter to a neighbor's house. The neighbor opened the door and saw James, who was frightened and crying. At his request, she called 911, asking them to come quickly because he claimed there had been a murder. Police spoke to Sarah, who seemed unaware of what had happened. She said she saw a multicolored bad guy on her parents' bed and saw her mother with blood on her face. It is extremely distressing for a child to be left alone in an apartment with a murdered mother for an entire day. This was a disturbing aspect of the case. Fortunately, Sarah was too young to fully understand the situation, so it did not affect her mental state much. The neighbors did not observe or hear anything unusual. The police investigated the crime scene but did not find any significant evidence or clues. The murder weapon, an axe, was taken from Kathy's family garage. It had been used to cut the grass. Notably, there were no fingerprints on the axe, suggesting that it had been deliberately cleaned. In addition, forensic experts found no fingerprints inside the house, which was puzzling since 3 people lived there and could have touched many objects. The police found this strange and assumed that the perpetrator had cleaned the entire house. However, the police did notice something strange in the kitchen. A damp bathroom rug was drying in the garage. James claimed that he had no idea why the rug was there and that nothing of note had been found on it. In 1982, forensic techniques did not allow for the collection or analysis of DNA. Police suspected that the incident was a botched robbery, theorizing that the attackers may have become frightened and decided to eliminate Kathy, a potential witness. However, some valuables were still intact. Kathy's bag, which had been left in the kitchen, had been emptied onto the floor, but the contents, money, jewelry, and expensive tea sets, were all there and neatly arranged. This raised an important question: why did the criminals leave these items behind? Even the cash that was openly left on the dresser had not been taken. Perhaps the criminal had scared Kathy, but in this case, fingerprints would have been left on these items. Yet, there were none, which was puzzling. This behavior was unusual, and the police noticed these discrepancies, raising suspicions that the crime scene had been staged. Some items were arranged in a way that suggested they were deliberately placed there. A crucial reason for dismissing robbery as a motive was that nothing had been stolen. Seasoned police officers, who regularly dealt with burglaries, immediately recognized that this incident was different. While murders were rare in Brighton, thefts and robberies occurred almost daily. Police believed that Kathy's death was a premeditated murder. The initial suspect was, of course, her husband, who discovered her body. Police began investigating James. James's friends and acquaintances described them as a happy, even idealistic couple. They had both grown up in the same Michigan city. Kathy came from a family of truck drivers, while James's parents owned a successful carpet store. They met in high school and began dating in college, eventually marrying on May 3, 1974. After their marriage, Kathy continued her studies in economics in Colorado, and in 1978, they celebrated the birth of their daughter, Sarah. Meanwhile, James became interested in further education and pursued a doctorate in economics. James then took a teaching position at the University of Lynchburg in Virginia. In 1981, the family relocated to Brighton, New York, where James found a job as an economist. Kathy was a devoted and caring mother to their daughter, always attentive and loving. However, friends noticed a significant change in Kathy's mood 6 months before her death. She became unusually irritable and restless, though they did not know the reasons behind her behavior. As the police investigated the family's situation, they discovered that things were not as perfect as they initially appeared. The couple kept their problems private, never discussing their issues publicly or seeking advice from others, which made it difficult to gather information. However, police found a brochure for marriage counseling in the family car, suggesting that there had been ongoing discord in their relationship. The police also contacted James's employer and learned that he had misrepresented his qualifications, claiming to have a doctorate. This deception led to him being assigned a role he was unqualified for, resulting in stress at work and further complicating his situation. James's cooperation helped the police gather information, and James agreed to attend the next meeting for questioning, but he did not attend. Less than 24 hours after the murder, he left the city without informing the police. This action of his made the police suspicious. He was intentionally fleeing. Police later discovered that James had gone to his parents' home in Michigan. They found him again and questioned him. He cooperated with the police by providing blood and hair samples for analysis. Unfortunately, DNA testing was not available at the time, so this did not yield any useful results. 10 days after Kathy was found dead in her bed, James hired a lawyer. The police did not have enough evidence to bring any charges in 1982. Police focused on information that James had left for work at 6:30 a.m. It was important to verify this detail and determine whether he could have been home at the time of the murder. Forensic examinations showed that Kathy had died in her sleep between 4:30 and 7:30 a.m., meaning she could have been murdered with an axe shortly after James left for work. While it was possible that the husband had committed the crime before leaving, it was difficult to understand why he would do so and then go to work, leaving their 3-year-old daughter behind. The mother's body remained in the house throughout the day. The investigation stalled. The evidence collected and the documents found did not shed light on the events of that morning. The James had no clear motive, making a jury trial unlikely. If the prosecution lost, they would not be able to bring new charges against him. In 1997, James met his old friend Sharon at a trade show. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and James asked her out, which she accepted. Sharon noticed that James was still deeply affected by his past loss. He seemed shocked by the traumatic event. James shared the basics of that terrible day with Sharon but avoided going into detail, and Sharon did not want to press him for more information. Their mutual understanding helped strengthen their relationship, and they later married. In 1999, they moved to another city, then moved across the country. At the same time, police continued their efforts on Kathy's case. New police re-examined the evidence, leading to the analysis of a large number of items related to the case. The police were committed to finding justice for the woman who had been so brutally murdered. In 2015, the FBI assisted Brighton police in their investigation, which led them to focus on a suspect, Kathy's husband, James. On April 16, 2016, 34 years after the murder, police made a surprise visit to James's home, hoping to meet him and possibly uncover inconsistencies in his previous statements. However, their plan did not go as planned. James appeared calm and welcoming. He chatted with the officers, agreed to have the conversation recorded, and did not request an attorney. They talked for an hour at the kitchen table, but James remained calm throughout the conversation. Eventually, one of the police asked him directly if he had anything to do with his wife's death. James was angry, said that he would never hurt his wife. Sharon defended him, saying that in all the time they were together, she had never witnessed any aggressive behavior from him. He was a caring and loving husband who would never lay a hand on her. She firmly believed that he was incapable of such cruelty. Sharon also participated in the police interrogation. Throughout the interrogation, she never doubted her husband's innocence. She felt that she had seen his sincere heart and kind nature over the years. Although her views seemed naive, she held these beliefs deeply. She never asked about the fate of James' ex-wife, as she was satisfied with the brief explanation he gave at the beginning of their relationship and never mentioned it again. Police found themselves at a dead end once again, prompting the decision to review all the evidence collected for DNA testing nearly 40 years after the crime. The murder weapon, an axe found in the victim's head, was sent to the FBI for analysis. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate any usable DNA on it because it had been tampered with. This was a significant setback. The police then sought to determine when the crime had occurred. One of the United States' leading forensic experts, Michael Baden, analyzed all the available information about the body. He concluded that the woman had likely died around 3:30 a.m., based on her body temperature and the amount of undigested food in her stomach. Therefore, when James arrived at work at 6:30 a.m., he would have definitely noticed that something was wrong. Police were skeptical of the idea of a botched robbery because nothing was taken. They questioned why the robbers would kill a woman who was sleeping and did not witness the robbery. This conflict led to the filing of murder charges. On November 8, 2019, James was arrested after being charged, but the 67-year-old did not confess to the crime. Police used the time of death to investigate a murder that had occurred 40 years earlier. They found evidence that a robbery had been staged. With this information, law enforcement and James presented their case to the jury, focusing on James' alleged involvement in the murder of Kathy Krausnack, his first wife. During the police, investigators discovered a dangerous criminal named Edla Rabbi, who lived about a mile and a half from Kathy's home in 1982. Rabbi was notorious for his harmful taste in women. Despite being arrested several times, Rabbi often received light sentences and served a total of more than 32 years in prison before his death in 2014. He confessed to killing Kathy but gave many inaccurate details, leading to skepticism about his claims. After each time in custody, he hunted for new victims, torturing them. His first confirmed murder occurred in 1991 when he strangled a 27-year-old woman named Stephanie Kupczynski. Although he confessed to the crime in 2012, he maintained that he had no intention of killing her and that the situation had spiraled out of control. Shortly before Kathy's murder, Rabbi had been released from prison in the 1980s. He was questioned and the investigation began but was not considered a likely suspect. Police questioned him briefly and then released him. As a result, James's lawyers claimed the police were negligent. Instead of pursuing the real killer, they chose to blame the grieving husband, James, who they considered the prime suspect. This situation had a significant impact on society. It was revealed that not only was the criminal dead by the time the case was revisited, but the police who investigated it in the 1980s were also deceased, meaning they could not be held accountable for any mistakes. During the original police, the police had only spoken to the murderer once and then disregarded him entirely. Since Edla Rabbi had passed away, he could not be questioned to clarify his role in the case. Nevertheless, many involved in the investigation still questioned whether he was connected to Kathy's murder. Although he confessed to killing Kathy before his death, numerous inconsistencies arose in his account, particularly regarding the handwriting, which did not resemble his at all. This conclusion was reached by all the experts who examined his case. First, he had a history of rape rather than robbery, yet no signs of sexual assault were found. Additionally, the murder weapon, an axe, was not typical of his methods, and the handwriting was evidently different. As a result, police did not consider him a suspect. Years ago, the prosecution was leaning towards the theory that Kathy's husband was her killer rather than a nearby maniac. During the trial, the prosecutor presented the time of death as crucial evidence. However, several defense experts disagreed with the assertion that Kathy died early, with most believing it occurred before 6:30 in the morning. It is believed that Kathy died at 6:30 a.m. after her husband left for work. The investigation was complicated by the fact that Kathy was under an electric blanket, and it was unclear whether it was on or off at the time of her death. If it was on, the temperature it reached was unknown. Experts attempted to estimate the time of death by analyzing the drop in body temperature. Ultimately, there is no reliable method for determining the exact time of death. Experts have differed, resulting in a margin of error of several hours. Another piece of evidence cited by the police was a shoe imprint found pressing down on a garbage bag at the crime scene. This imprint resembled the shoes worn by Kathy's husband, who was absent at the time of her death. However, this evidence alone was not enough to establish his guilt. The prosecutor argued that the husband was the only possible suspect because he had a motive stemming from family issues. After lengthy deliberations at the hearing, the verdict was announced in court. The jury were unanimous in only one opinion, that the crime was too confusing and contradictory, and the evidence too dubious and easily dismissed. Despite this, James Krausnack was convicted of second-degree murder in November 2022 and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The verdict came as a shock to many, especially to those close to James who knew him well. They had remained certain that James was not guilty because there was no serious evidence of his involvement. James himself also asserted his innocence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bruce Pardo. In December 2008, the Ortega family invited their adult children and their families to their beautiful home in Covina, California, to celebrate Christmas. Covina is a quiet town with a low crime rate, located about 30 kilometers from Los Angeles. Joseph and Alice Ortega cherished Christmas as a time to bring their loved ones together. They had 5 children, 2 sons, Charles and James, and 3 daughters, Alicia, Letitia, and Sylvia. During this festive gathering, they engaged in their traditional poker games, enjoying laughter and joy while celebrating together. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. No one suspected that the person at the door intended to harm the Ortega family. So, they opened the door without hesitation. A few minutes later, a neighbor called 911 in a panic, yelling that the house across the street was on fire. He urgently requested firefighters to come quickly. Chaos unfolded at the scene. Firefighters were dispatched immediately to put out the flames. However, by the time they arrived, the emergency service had received several more calls from concerned neighbors. Some reported hearing gunfire, while others mentioned seeing people fleeing the house and crying for help. All available emergency crews were sent to manage the situation. Later, one of the police officers who arrived at the house described the scene as an apocalypse. Everything was on fire, and a large number of special service personnel and equipment had arrived, causing many people to rush around. Most neighbors came out of their homes, watching helplessly as firefighters worked to put out the flames at the Ortega family's house. In the midst of this chaos, they quickly located Letitia and Katrina, her 8-year-old daughter, who had managed to escape the violence. Remarkably, both survived. Initially, it was thought they had fled the fire, but the reality was much more disturbing. When the police arrived, Letitia was no longer at the house. Her daughter had been seriously injured by a gunshot and was taken to the hospital, where doctors were fighting to save her life. Letitia, a key witness, was interviewed at the hospital and shared a shocking story that disturbed the entire city. She explained that during Christmas celebrations, a man dressed as Santa Claus came to the Ortega family's home. Instead of spreading holiday cheer, he pulled out a gun and started shooting. After the attack, the man in the Santa costume set the house on fire to destroy evidence. Due to her injuries, Letitia couldn't provide further details. Neighbors backed up Letitia's account, saying that at around 2:45 a.m., they saw a strange car with a Santa Claus image driving away from a dead-end street near her home. In an effort to apprehend the shooter, police quickly began investigating who had been in the area at the time. After firefighters extinguished the fire, they found the bodies of the victims amid the rubble. In total, 9 people were killed, and their bodies were burned beyond recognition. Forensic experts later confirmed that only the hosts and their daughter had died from gunshot wounds. The other guests suffered from gunshot wounds to varying degrees, but ultimately died from smoke inhalation and fire. Some of the bodies were so badly mutilated that they could only be identified through dental records. The initial situation worsened and police discovered another victim in a pool of blood in nearby Sylmar, California. Bruce Pardo was found dead by his brother, who had just returned from a Christmas party. Upon the police's arrival, they discovered 40-year-old Bruce had a single fatal gunshot wound to the head. Police initially thought Bruce ended his own life, as a 9mm pistol was found lying on his knees, with another gun lying on the floor next to him. Police confirmed that Bruce had recently finalized his divorce from Sylvia, from whom he had officially separated on December 18, 2008. Notably, Sylvia's maiden name was Arte, and she was involved in the Coven massacre. Police quickly suspected a connection between the murders. They believed that Bruce's death was staged to look like a voluntary act, implying that the real criminal wanted to conceal his involvement. It is believed that Bruce, who was allegedly the attacker, disguised as Santa Claus, ended his own life the murders. Forensic analysis revealed that each of the 9 victims had been shot at least once. All the bodies had 9mm caliber bullets, which matched the weapon found beside Bruce's body. Later, police encountered Letitia. Despite the assailant's disguise, she was able to identify him. She claimed he closely resembled Bruce Pardo. Other family members present during the shooting were shouting this as well. With her testimony, police returned to the crime scene where Bruce's body was found. They began searching Bruce's car and discovered bloody footprints. They also confirmed that neighbors had seen the same car in the bay that evening, just before it fled the scene as the fire broke out. Bruce had asked Sylvia Ortega's parents, Joseph and Alice, to arrange a family get-together on Christmas Eve. This tradition involved the entire family getting together every year to play themed games. However, the holiday made them an easy target for a mysterious attacker dressed as Santa Claus. The attacker created a terrifying nightmare. It seemed that the attacker had harbored a deep hatred for the family, leading to such a horrific act, showing no mercy even to the children. Bruce had a negative attitude toward his ex-wife, Sylvia, and her family, which fueled his actions. The fire and shooting caused the most harm to Sylvia and her parents, whom Bruce despised. He was aware of the family's annual Christmas celebration and likely planned his attack in advance. This all felt too calculated to be a coincidence. Letitia continued recounting the events of that day. The Ortega family was gathered in large numbers. Sylvia, who was divorced from Bruce at the time, was present along with her 4 siblings, some of whom brought their children. Additionally, several friends attended the party. With so many people there, no one could recall the exact number of guests. During the celebration, just before midnight, they heard the doorbell ring. Although they weren't expecting any more guests, Sylvia's 8-year-old niece, Katrina, went to the door and looked through the peephole. She spotted Santa on the other side, dressed in his familiar red and white suit and carrying a bag. Excited, she told everyone about it. The adults exchanged puzzled glances, as they hadn't arranged for any entertainers in costumes. Later, neighbors mentioned that they had seen a man in a Santa suit approaching the Ortega family's home around the same time. One neighbor waved to him and wished him a Merry Christmas. The neighbor recounted that Santa Claus stopped at the Ortega house's doorstep, rang the doorbell, and waited. The neighbor then stopped watching, assuming it was just an Ortega family celebration. However, as he closed his door, he suddenly heard gunshots and screams, prompting him to call 911. The Santa suit fooled the guests, who thought a surprise was planned for them. They did not ask who the guests were and opened the door. He brought a bag, but instead of gifts, it contained guns and a homemade flamethrower. Letitia, Katrina's mother, grabbed a video camera to capture the festive moment. At that moment, Letitia heard applause. Her daughter Katrina ran toward Santa, who stood at the door with a large red bag. However, instead of presents, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at the child's face. Santa shot Katrina before anyone could react. Following that, he began firing at everyone in his path. Chaos erupted in the house as he ran out of bullets. He quickly retrieved a second gun with a full magazine. The assailant showed no mercy, even targeting children. In the ensuing panic, parents and 2 sisters sought refuge under the dining table. The attacker clearly saw his victims and shot them at close range, firing multiple shots at each, mostly in the back and head. Santa moved among them, continuing to shoot at the defenseless. He went through the rooms of the house checking and shooting everyone he saw. One of the bullets hit Sylvia's brother, James. Her other brother, Charles, screamed that he recognized the shooter. He barely had time to say Bruce Pardo's name before several gunshots rang out, and he was silenced forever. After moving through the house and leaving a trail of blood, Santa decided to destroy the evidence of his crime. He pulled a homemade flamethrower from his gift bag and began spraying fuel on the victims and surrounding furniture. Immediately, the entire first floor was engulfed in flames. Letitia said that the Santa suit caught fire and the attacker to flee the scene. This gave Letitia the opportunity to reach her daughter and take her to safety, but she was unable to save anyone else. Her child suffered serious head injuries, prompting a neighbor to quickly call emergency services. A 16-year-old boy and 2 other guests, along with everyone in the living room within sight of the attacker, were injured or killed. The survivors could only watch helplessly as the house burned, especially when a gas cylinder exploded inside. Firefighters arrived shortly after to extinguish the fire, with nearly 80 people on the scene. Despite their efforts, it took them an hour and a half to bring the fire under control. Police were initially skeptical, but a thorough investigation of the crime scene and autopsy confirmed that Bruce had indeed ended his own life, as no one else was in the house when he pulled the trigger. He also suffered severe third-degree burns to his arms and legs. Letitia mentioned that his Santa suit had caught fire during the incident, raising doubts about whether Bruce was actually responsible for the crime. It was clear to everyone that Bruce and Sylvia met through a mutual friend at work. At the time, Sylvia was divorced and had 3 children from her previous marriage. She and Bruce quickly connected and started dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by December 2006, they decided to get married. Following their wedding, they bought a lovely house to accommodate their growing family. Bruce had a stable job as an electrical engineer at a large local company and also volunteered at the local Catholic church. Generally, people viewed him as a positive and helpful person, always willing to assist others in difficult situations, unless the conversation turned to money. Bruce always aimed to become wealthy. He worked hard, which allowed him to buy a boat and several cars over time. With their good income, he and his wife were able to purchase an expensive house with a mortgage, making their first payment together. However, since the house was located in a high-end area, their relationship began to suffer. By 2007, Sylvia started to voice her frustrations more often, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities she had to shoulder. She worked and earned a good salary while also raising 3 children, whom Bruce did not help with. Despite this, he took on most of the financial responsibilities for repaying the mortgage. Sylvia felt that Bruce did not contribute enough to their common goals. Despite this, she still took care of his dog. They had a joint savings account, but she believed that she did more to support them financially. Conflict arose over money because Bruce was stingy, which frustrated Sylvia. They had originally agreed that Sylvia would support her 3 children from a previous relationship, so Bruce refused to spend money on them. At first, their family life was relatively stable, but Bruce's greed soon began to annoy Sylvia. She expected their savings to total around $88,000. In 2007, when she checked the account, she discovered that Bruce had transferred all their savings to his personal account, leaving only $9,000. This incident significantly strained their marriage. Later, Sylvia learned that Bruce had been unfaithful throughout their marriage. From the beginning, he insisted he didn't want children and denied being a father until Sylvia found out from his mother that he had a child. Bruce had a normal childhood. His school years were normal and free of negative influences. He was quite intelligent. As a result, he entered California State University, Northridge. After completing his studies, he took a job as an electrical engineer at a large research company. Bruce excelled in his profession, which brought him recognition and rapid advancement in his career. However, this was not enough for him. Bruce became focused on the earnings of his colleagues and developed jealousy whenever someone made more money than he did. To cope with this, he started claiming more working hours than he actually worked. Those who knew him well described this behavior as an obsession with money. This obsession ultimately resulted in his dismissal when the deceit was discovered. Relatives noted that Bruce struggled with relationships with women. Although he was attractive and dated many, these relationships often ended abruptly. Financial problems were a constant issue in his life. Bruce started dating a colleague named Dea, and they both seemed serious about their relationship, even planning a wedding together. However, financial concerns became a point of contention. Despite having a good income and some savings, Bruce was unwilling to spend money on a lavish wedding, considering it a waste. He preferred a simpler celebration, but Dea, who was set on having a grand wedding, chose to pay for the extravagant event she had always wanted. Dea took care of all the arrangements for the ceremony and paid for everything herself. However, Bruce was absent. He had backed out of the wedding, running away with $3,000 from their joint account, which they had been saving for their honeymoon. Instead of marrying Dea, he went to Palm Springs by himself and spent all the money on his own enjoyment. This decision also ended his relationship with Dea. In the following years, Bruce dated several women. But his greed led to the failure of those relationships as well. Friends noted that he was consistently the cause of the breakups, as none of his relationships lasted long due to his obsession with money. This continued until Bruce turned 30. During this time, he met Elena Luca, and they eventually married and had a son named Matthew in 2001. Tragically, when Matthew was only 1 year old, an accident occurred. While Elena went to the store for a while, Matthew was in Bruce's care. But Matthew fell into the pool in their yard. When Elena returned, she found Bruce and their son not breathing. It is unclear why Bruce did not call for help or attempt to resuscitate Matthew. Elena quickly called 911. Although doctors were able to revive Matthew, he suffered severe, irreversible brain damage that left him partially paralyzed for the rest of his life. Bruce's erratic behavior led Elena to suspect that he wanted to abandon their child, whom he seemed to find uninteresting. Bruce then chose to leave Elena and their disabled child, without providing any financial support. This left Elena in a difficult situation, as she was not working and in dire need of help. Despite her constant requests and innuendos, Bruce chose to ignore her, avoiding all contact with Matthew and ignoring Elena's pleas. By the time of the tragic events, the medical bills had exceeded $35,000, and with no payment agreement in place, Elena turned to the court for help. She was later awarded a monthly payment of $240, but the amount was not enough to care for a disabled child. When Sylvia discovered his past actions, she chose to end their marriage. She was outraged by Bruce's lack of concern for their son, which made it impossible for her to stay with him. Consequently, she filed for divorce. The court ordered Bruce to pay Sylvia a one-time settlement of $10,000, which was significantly less than what he had withdrawn from their joint account. Additionally, he was required to pay monthly alimony. Sylvia also retained her engagement ring and the dog they had adopted during their marriage. The division of their real estate was still being decided in court. Bruce's ideal life began to crumble. Not only did he go through a costly divorce, but he also lost his job, which made his financial situation worse. Accustomed to a high standard of living, he could no longer maintain his previous lifestyle. They believed that during this trying time, Bruce hatched a sinister plan for revenge. Just before Christmas, Bruce purchased 2 handguns, an air compressor, a high-octane flamethrower, and a custom-made Santa Claus suit. He used these items in the murders of the Ortega family on December 24th. After the murders, Bruce contacted the police to report a vehicle parked in front of his Pasadena home. When the license plate was checked, police discovered that the Dodge Caliber had been rented by Bruce Pardo. The vehicle was equipped for long-distance travel, with everything needed for an escape, including a laptop, several sets of clothes, food, and maps of both Mexico and the United States. It is possible that Bruce had planned to flee the country after the murder, but then changed his plans. In the trunk of his car, police discovered 4 pistols with 13-round magazines and about 200 rounds of ammunition. As a result of these events, a tragic array of consequences ensued. 13 children were left without parents. The massacre could have been much worse had the children been present at the Christmas gathering. Following the attack, custody of the surviving children was granted to their uninjured family members. One of the hardest-hit victims was a girl named Katrina, who was shot in the head while greeting Santa Claus at the entrance of the house. Surgeons fought to save her life, and miraculously, they succeeded. However, she endured a long and difficult recovery thereafter. Toxicology tests revealed that Bruce Pardo was under the influence of illegal substances during the attack, which amplified his violent behavior. It also emerged that he had booked a flight for Christmas morning. Given his chaotic mental state, he frequently changed his plans. Just half an hour after the massacre, he purchased a ticket to Canada. His intention may have been to flee. Police later discovered that Bruce had intended to stop in Minnesota, where a close friend lived. In the days before the murders, he had called the friend to express his plans to visit. However, it is still unclear whether Bruce actually intended to make the visit or if it was just a hoax to fool the police. The police also discovered that Bruce may have been plotting to kill his biological mother, as she was the one who informed Sylvia about Bruce's disabled child. In addition, his mother still maintained a close relationship with Sylvia and the entire Ortega family. She was supposed to be at the Christmas party, but she was sick that day so could not attend, so she escaped death. Despite his controversial nature, those who knew Bruce had never previously witnessed aggression from him. He was typically calm and balanced, albeit greedy and cunning. Police theorized that a tumultuous divorce, financial worries, job loss, and an obsession with money pushed Bruce onto the path of crime. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Lindsay Lee. On Monday, March 13, 2017, Lindsay Lee, a 31-year-old woman, had a busy day. After finishing her work shift, she attended a martial arts training session at the gym. Following her workout, she went to the supermarket for groceries and returned home around 8:30 p.m. Exhausted, Lindsay looked forward to resting since she needed to be at work in the morning. She works full-time as an IT specialist at the local police station. At the end of the day, she returned to her 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house on Halley VD. However, at that moment, she was faced with an unexpected threat waiting for her inside her own home. As she entered the house, she was ambushed as soon as she closed the door. On March 14th, it seemed like just another weekday for the Sheriff's Department in Lexington County, South Carolina, where Lindsay worked. Officers arrived early, but it was quickly apparent that Lindsay had not shown up yet. She was always energetic and was usually one of the first to arrive at the sheriff's office. Her co-workers were immediately worried and surprised when they didn't see Lindsay at work. First, they texted her, but she didn't respond. Next, they tried calling her, but Lindsay didn't answer. This behavior was unusual for her. She was known for being punctual and was usually one of the first to arrive at the office. Even when she was sick, she always informed her co-workers. After failing to reach Lindsay, the police contacted the patrol unit. A nearby police car was dispatched to check on her. The assigned officer was Shannon Lovell, who was also a close friend of Lindsay's. He arrived at her home around 10 a.m. and knocked on the front door, but received no response. So he decided to go around to the back door. He carefully examined the scene and noticed the first signs of trouble. The back door was heavily damaged. He quickly concluded that someone had broken into the Lindsay's house. Shannon promptly called for backup. His fellow officers arrived within minutes. Together, they entered the Lindsay's house, unaware of the horrifying scene that awaited them. They heard running water and assumed that Lindsay might be taking a shower and hadn't heard them. Remaining cautious, the officers ascended to the second floor and approached the bathroom, where they heard the water noise behind a curtain. When they pushed the curtain aside, they discovered Lindsay's body lying in an unnatural position. The bathtub was filled with blood, and she had a deep 10 centimeters cut on her throat. Lindsay was born in September. Her family lives in Arkansas. When Lindsay was 5 years old, her younger sister Carista was born. As Carista grew older, the sisters developed a close bond and became best friends. Lindsay served as a role model for Carista, who eagerly followed her sister's interests and activities. It was no surprise that Lindsay became the family's fashion icon, influencing Carista's style. Whenever Lindsay tried something new, like roller skating, Carista would eagerly join in the next day. The children grew up in Heber Springs, Arkansas, but job opportunities in that suburb were limited. Then her father joined the Army. His military career led to frequent moves for the family, starting with a move to California, which was very different from their small-town life. The family continued to move around, living in many different cities and states before finally settling in South Carolina. This constant moving helps children adapt quickly to new environments, which contributed to Lindsay's development. With her bubbly personality and confidence, she had no difficulty communicating with others. From a young age, Lindsay showed intelligence, especially in math and science. However, throughout high school, she struggled with her weight. This led to feelings of low self-esteem and made her a target for ridicule. Despite these challenges, Lindsay remained focused on her future. In the early 2000s, Lindsay attended Midlands Technical College in Columbia, South Carolina. Due to her high GPA, she received a scholarship in 2004. By 2008, at the age of 23, she was working at a local bank. One day, an attractive mechanic named Jason Lee, who was 29 at the time, came in to repair a broken safe. They struck up a conversation and felt an instant attraction. The next day, Jason asked Lindsay out, and after a few meetings, they officially started dating. On a date, the couple went boating at sunset. Jason asked Lindsay to go on a dolphin-watching adventure. However, he had more exciting plans for Lindsay. As the sun set over the horizon, Jason proposed to her and Lindsay accepted his proposal. Jason was not only handsome and romantic but also a talented guy. The couple shared many common interests, and whenever there was a problem, Jason was always ready to help Lindsay without hesitation. Whether her car broke down or there was any other problem, he could easily handle it. Both of them were kind, cheerful, and had similar personalities, which further strengthened their relationship. The couple got married 2 years after they met, in 2010. Lindsay was so captivating that Jason couldn't help but cry tears of joy. However, they weren't very active, which led to weight gain. In 2014, Jason decided to start going to the gym to address this issue. He quickly began encouraging Lindsay to join him, but she resisted the idea of exercising for a long time. Jason's trainer, Graham Hockley, was a tough and straightforward Brit who helped him get back in shape. By 2015, Jason had transformed and looked much more athletic. As Jason began his sports training, Lindsay noticed his progress and decided to join him. They both trusted their trainer, Graham. Initially, Lindsay didn't like him much because he pushed her hard and didn't pay attention to her complaints. However, this tough approach worked. After a few months, Lindsay had a remarkable transformation. Her training became easier, she got in shape, and she felt more attractive. Eventually, Graham suggested that they try martial arts. After some hesitation, they agreed. Graham was an expert, helped improve various aspects of Lindsay's life. He created a nutrition and training program for them that helped them get fit, and he introduced them to judo. This challenging sport would help Lindsay and Jason become real athletes. Within about a year of training, she lost over 50 kilograms. She not only looked different but also felt healthier. Lindsay no longer struggled with shortness of breath or joint pain. Fitness became a vital part of her life. She eagerly attended every training session and was determined not to miss any, no matter what. Lindsay's success and transformation were evident to everyone around her. Her close friends admired the changes in her life, and she even participated in an advertising campaign organized by her coach. Lindsay was truly inspired by her transformation and new image. She diligently followed all of her coach's guidance, including sticking to a strict diet. Because of her determination, she even won awards in several amateur tournaments. This achievement motivated her to encourage her entire team at work to get involved in sports, which boosted her self-confidence immensely. Eventually, Lindsay realized she needed significant changes in her personal life as well. Her marital bliss was deteriorating. Over time, she and Jason started to drift apart. Jason had long since stopped making progress in his own training, and eventually, he quit altogether. He wanted Lindsay to stop playing sports too, partly because he feared she might develop a romantic relationship with her trainer. Over time, Jason became convinced that Lindsay was cheating on him, even though he had no proof. Lindsay's friends and acquaintances were familiar with Graham. However, Lindsay remained faithful in her marriage, or at least that's what everyone believed. Despite this, Jason's jealousy and suspicion grew stronger. An important factor that worsened their relationship was their different views on having children. At the beginning of their marriage, and even before. They both agreed not to have children in order to focus on their careers and themselves. However, Jason later changed his mind and wanted to have children. But Lindsay remained steadfast in her choice, valuing her independence. This difference in views left Lindsay facing a difficult decision. After 6 years of marriage, she chose to ask Jason for a divorce, realizing that she could not provide him with what he wanted. She was not ready for children and was determined to move forward, but not in the direction Jason wanted. The couple separated in April 2016 and updated their social media statuses. After the breakup, Jason moved to an apartment in Simpsonville, South Carolina, about a 2-hour drive from their shared home, where he lived with his mother. He quickly found a new job as a mechanic in Greenville, which was only a short drive from his apartment. With the distance between them, it seemed that both of them had started to rebuild their lives. Their divorce was amicable, without any significant problems arising. Jason and Lindsay planned to split their house. She chose to renovate it and sell it herself to split the profits. Since it was a spacious house, she believed that she could sell it for a good price. To assist her in the renovation, Jason helped out, while Lindsay paid for all the materials. Everyone around them saw their divorce as amicable, indicating that the former couple's relationship could remain friendly. By February 2017, Lindsay had significantly transformed her appearance. She changed her hairstyle and hair color, which made her look rejuvenated. Her friends interpreted this change as a signal that she was ready to begin a new chapter in her life. The formal conclusion of her divorce was planned for April 2017. However, this event never occurred, as Lindsay's body was discovered in her bathroom on March 14, 2017. Shannon, the first person to arrive at the scene, was eager to take charge of the investigation but was denied access to the case. As a close friend of Lindsay, he struggled to remain impartial. And her death deeply affected him and the other police involved in the investigation. The police were confused. Lindsay had good relationships with everyone, even her ex-husband, with whom she had parted on friendly terms. With no leads in the case, the police turned their attention to her husband, Jason, who was in the process of divorcing her. They found him working at a metalworking shop in the county. Upon hearing the news of Lindsay's murder, Jason broke down in tears. He immediately agreed to accompany the police to the station and answer their questions. Without waiting for detailed inquiries, he began to recount the events leading up to his wife's murder. Jason explained that on Monday, March 13th, he had a severely injured leg and was in pain at home. To manage the discomfort, he took a painkiller and went to bed. The next morning, he discovered that his car was missing and assumed it had been confiscated due to his overdue rent. He tried to convince the police that he couldn't have reached the crime scene. However, the police noticed suspicious scratches on his face, which he claimed were from grooming, even though the wounds did not look like typical shaving cuts. The police collected DNA samples from him, which he willingly provided. Police then searched Lindsay's home for evidence. A forensic scientist discovered several suspicious items there. It appeared that the attack had occurred nearby, as there were products that Lindsay had purchased before returning home scattered around. She was last seen alive walking home from a local supermarket, confirmed by a Walmart receipt and surveillance camera footage. The footage showed her calmly walking through the store, cramming a basket full of fruits and vegetables. No one was following her, and police were able to track her movements almost to her front door. Throughout the entire journey, Lindsay did not look back and appeared calm, suggesting that she was not being followed or threatened. It is possible that her attacker was waiting for her inside her home. Later, one of the patrol officers called the police station. He reported that on March 14th, he saw a man driving a car on the street who looked like Jason. The man had a large scratch on his cheek and was acting aggressively, accusing the officer of damaging his car, although the officer had just been standing by. The patrol officer didn't notice anything else suspicious, so he let the man go but remembered his odd behavior. He recalled this encounter as soon as he heard about the investigation and saw a photo of Jason. Surprisingly, the incident happened in the parking lot of the supermarket where Lindsay was shopping. Luckily, the patrol officer remembered the license plate number. When he checked, he saw that the car was registered to Jason. This meant that his car had not been impounded. The officer then reviewed the supermarket surveillance footage. On March 14th at 5:17 a.m., surveillance footage captured a car entering the parking lot and a figure resembling Jason exited the vehicle. The poor lighting and grainy quality of the video made it difficult to clearly identify the person. After disappearing into the darkness, he reappeared 50 minutes later in his work pickup truck, which he parked next to his car. Within 4 minutes, the Jason searched the trunks of both vehicles, likely moving the murder weapon during this time before disposing of it. Police did not find the knife that killed Lindsay. Jason admitted to lying a little about the car being impounded, saying he had gone to the parking lot that morning to buy groceries. Although Jason had previously claimed that he was at home resting on strong painkillers at the time of the murder. When police searched his apartment, they discovered a package of latex gloves that matched the gloves found at the crime scene, along with 3 small pieces of similar blue gloves. Police believe Jason used latex gloves to hide his fingerprints. However, no additional evidence was found, and Jason's car was even washed. On March 17, 2017, just 3 days after Lindsay's murder, 38-year-old Jason Lee was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and first-degree burglary. He was jailed without bail and could face life in prison or the death penalty under state law. He shocked Lindsay's family and friends, but he maintained his innocence throughout the trial. The trial took place in November 2019. Prosecutors claimed that Jason broke in through the back door while Lindsay was away and waited for her to return. When she arrived home, Jason attacked her, overpowered her, and knocked her to the floor. A struggle ensued, during which he began strangling Lindsay until she lost consciousness. He then dragged her body into the bathroom and attempted to slit her throat with a knife, but Lindsay regained consciousness and fought back. Lindsay had scratches on her face, and her hands were on the floor. In the bathroom, she fought desperately for her life, but Jason was stronger and killed her. The police ran a toxicology test and found no alcohol or drugs in her system. The medical examiner noted that Lindsay had both defensive wounds and signs of strangulation on her body. The crime was clearly motivated by personal reasons. The prosecution believes Jason did not want to divorce his wife and chose to kill her rather than face the possibility of her being with another man. In addition, Jason was struggling with financial problems. He was behind on his car payments, had a lot of debt, and had maxed out his credit cards, leaving him with less than $100 in the bank. He was facing eviction from his apartment and owed Lindsay $1,300, which led to a lawsuit as she sought to recoup the money. During the investigation, it was discovered that Jason had to repay this debt by April 1, 2017, and Lindsay was determined to have him jailed if he did not pay. Inspecting Jason's mobile phone revealed that he had saved Lindsay's contact under the name Greedy for money. This indicated that the divorce proceedings were far from amicable. During this time, Jason began a new relationship and confided in his girlfriend about his financial problems and his troubles with Lindsay. They had previously agreed to split the proceeds from the sale of Lindsay's house, but Lindsay later wanted to keep all the money for herself. On the day of the attack, Jason's co-workers noticed he was limping and complaining of pain in his leg, but the next morning he seemed fine. Another of his lies. Although he told police the scratch on his face was from shaving, but he told his co-workers that he had been scratched by a cat. To avoid detection on the night of the attack, Jason turned off all communications to prevent GPS tracking, which aroused suspicion. He then deleted all information from his phone, including his search history. Some data was recovered during the investigation. Before the body was found, he contacted his tax consultant and requested a tax refund, suggesting he knew his wife was dead and had already removed her from his life. At trial, Coach Graham did not confirm any romantic relationship with Lindsay. He claimed to be a close friend of Lindsay's. Graham told the jury that he had taught her self-defense techniques to help her protect herself from her husband if necessary. He believed the killer was Jason, who had recently had problems with her. The defense insisted that no traces of Lindsay's DNA were found in Jason's home or car, nor on his clothing or in his truck. On November 22, 2019, the jury began deliberating. Just over an hour later, they concluded Jason Lee, 40, guilty of murdering 31-year-old Lindsay Lee, and guilty of burglary. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before leaving the courthouse, Jason reiterated his innocence and vowed to keep fighting for his freedom. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sydney Stevens. Pinckneyville, located in the United States, is a small town known for its friendly local community and laid-back lifestyle. It is also a great place for fishing enthusiasts. On July 25, 2010, two fishermen were fishing in the near Boku Creek Bridge south of Pinckneyville when they spotted a strange object in the water. Approaching it, they realized it was the body of a girl floating face down. Her right arm was tied with a rope to a concrete block, but the body had risen to the surface due to decomposition and shallow water. The body was in a deteriorated state, making identification difficult. The only clues were a belly piercing and a necklace with a musical note pendant. After checking the information in the database, law enforcement officers discovered that a similar girl had recently disappeared. She was Sydney Stevens, 15, who had gone missing on July 19, 2010, exactly 1 week before body was discovered. Sydney's parents, Tracy and Tim, said she had recently suffered from mental health issues after learning that they had separated shortly before she went missing. She was shocked to learn that Tim, the man who raised her, was not her biological father. This revelation led to a mental disorder and severe depression. She ran away from home multiple times, isolated herself from friends, and even attempted ending her life. To protect her, the family decided to keep her at home under supervision. At this time, she was either cared for by her mother, Tim, or her 17-year-old half-sister, Dakota Wall. The house doors were kept locked, and everything was under control until the morning of July 20th, when her mother found she missing at 6:30 a.m. Tracy suspected something was wrong because Sydney's room was in complete disarray, the dresser was overturned, and belongings were scattered everywhere. She called Dakota, who suggested Sydney had run away again. However, Tracy's concern grew when she saw that Sydney was not logged into social media since the previous evening, which was unusual. Upon inspecting the room, she noticed all of Sydney's personal items were still there, including her purse, phone, shoes, and clothes. It didn't seem like she had run away, it was as if she had left in her pajamas and without shoes. Tracy attempted to locate Sydney but was unsuccessful. Sydney's friends were also unaware of her whereabouts, so Tracy filed a missing Sydney report with the police. The detectives were initially hesitant to take on this case. They knew Sydney had problems, so they thought she just ran away from home again and would come back home later. Therefore, investigators shelved Tracy's testimony and only her relatives and friends participated in the search for her. They searched but in vain. A week later, on July 25, 2010, her body was discovered underwater. Her mother, Tracy, was summoned to the police station to identify her. Tracy immediately recognized her daughter's jewelry and confirmed a belly piercing. Dental records definitively identified the body as Sydney's. Once the body is identified, police need to determine what happened to her. The autopsy revealed shocking details, that is, Sydney was murdered. Forensic experts found evidence of multiple injuries, including gunshot wounds and signs of a violent death. This thing stunned everyone. They could not understand why the suspect could target the young girl in such a brutal way. The day before Sydney disappeared, she had planned to go on a hike with her friends, but her mother did not allow it, which made her very sad. She spent the entire day alone under house arrest. When police investigated the house, they found no signs of a break-in. The doors were always kept closed, suggesting that either a family member let the kidnappers in, or they had a key. The relatives insisted they didn't give keys to any strangers. At the time of the incident, only Tracy and Dakota were in the house. The police began questioning the closest relatives, friends, and Sydney's acquaintance, as those close to the victim are often involved in such crimes. Due to the violent nature of the crime, the investigators suspected a personal motive. Tracy reported coming home around 10 p.m. At that time, Sydney was in one room watching TV. Tracy had taken prescribed medication to sleep in her room. Tim was not home that night, he was on a business trip. The most scrutinized individuals were Sydney's sister, Dakota, and her boyfriend, Chad Bennett, who is 20 years old. They both denied any connection to the crime. Dakota stated that she saw Chad the day before, when he visited her to watch a movie, after which he went to work. Chad confirmed her account. However, detectives were suspicious of Chad because he had a criminal record, which included possession of illegal substances and petty theft. As a result, the police brought in his accomplices for questioning: Carl Dane, 18, James Glazier, 17, and Robbie Mueller, 15. All three were friends with Dakota, the old sister of Sydney. During questioning, the young men were evasive and inconsistent in their statements. Ultimately, they told a similar story but with different details. According to their accounts, on the night of July 19, 2010, Carl, James, and Robbie went to Sydney's house. They had a brutal plan as part of their group ceremony, which required performing an evil deed. The plan was to kill Sydney's mother, Tracy, without leaving any evidence. However, as they were moving around house, Sydney woke up, stepped into the hallway, and called for her mother. The attackers stopped her in time, preventing her from making any noise. They held her mouth and nose so tightly that she lost consciousness. Then, they decide that killing Sydney is enough for their initiation ceremony and they choose not to harm Tracy. They carried her body to the car, but she regained consciousness. They continued to torture, beat, and strangle her until she passed out again. They then disposed of her by dumping her into the water, tying a concrete block to her body so it would sink and so that no one can find the body. However, this plan backfired because, during decomposition, gases are formed, causing the body to eventually float. All three individuals, Carl, James, and Robbie, were arrested on July 28. Their story seemed highly implausible. They initially intended to kill Tracy, but instead killed Sydney. Something was evidently amiss. The police suspected that, besides this heinous crime, they might have raped she, as her trousers were down when the body was discovered. However, none of the suspects admitted to this act. The body's condition was poor because the water had erased all evidence, so the police can't confirm this. About the lowered trousers, they denied rape, they suggesting it was related to the influence of illegal substances. Law enforcement knew that gangs have a hierarchy and strict discipline. Although Chad, the leader, denied his guilt, it was inevitable that he was involved in this crime. In fact, the attack could only have been carried out with his approval, especially since he could not avoid participating in the initiation everyone was talking about. It was known that Sydney had gunshot wounds, but members of Chad's team chose not to mention it, resulting in their statements being unreliable. Sydney was shot with a .22 caliber pistol. Carl, a member of Chad's group, who had once met Sydney, possessed a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. This weapon was quite costly, and Carl claimed he couldn't afford it, saying Chad had given it to him. Under the pressure of skilled police questioning, members of Chad's team admitted that he directed their actions. They agreed to testify against he, even though he continued to deny any involvement in the crime. Consequently, Chad was also arrested, though the police suspected there were more people involved in Sydney's murder. They believed Dakota might have been part of it, but she continued to deny any involvement, asserting that she loved her sister and they had a good relationship. Detectives continued their investigation after noticing many inconsistencies in the story. When speaking with the Sydney family's relatives and friends, detectives discovered that Dakota actually despised Sydney. She usually tries to join Dakota in group activities, which annoyed the group, especially Dakota. Dakota wants to spend more time with her boyfriend, Chad, instead of with her. However, Dakota was responsible for looking after she while their parents were at work and also have to clean and do other housework. Dakota couldn't get rid of Sydney, so she had to put up with it. At Sydney's funeral, Dakota appeared happy during the service. She smiled casually and chatted cheerfully with everyone who came to pay their respects. She seemed unaffected by her younger sister's passing. Police followed Dakota and they later questioned her for several hours. The detectives intentionally confused her with unexpected questions to catch her in a lie. Eventually, she began to disclose some details. She admitted that during a trip to another city, Nashville, she overheard her friends from the group discussing what had happened. This was on July 21st, just 2 days after Sydney disappeared. She said 2 members of the group, James and Carl, were talking about the murder. At first, she thought they were referring to someone else since Sydney's body had not yet been found, but then she realized they were speaking about her 15-year-old sister, Sydney. They discussed how they beat, strangled, and drowned Sydney, then tying body to a concrete block. Dakota began her story by explaining that on July 23rd, she was with Chad's group at Carl's house, where she overheard a conversation about the murder. Carl mentioned having a gun and he shot someone with that gun. Under police pressure, Dakota disclosed more details, admitting that she knew who was in a car parked near the house on the night Sydney disappeared. These individuals were members of Chad's group. They entered the house and did something to Sydney. She confessed this to the officer, but explained that she had been too afraid of they to speak up earlier. However, Dakota's account was becoming inconsistent. In her new testimony, she alleged that Carl had threatened her life if she informed the police. The officers noted her lack of emotion and how careful she was in giving her testimony. Investigators knew that she seemed pleased about Sydney's death, casting doubt on her innocence. To probe further, the police pretended to know everything about the crime, including Dakota's relevance, but claimed they were unclear about the motive. This unsettled she, yet she did not confess to any wrongdoing. The case garnered public attention. They intensely discussed the shocking crime. Rumors circulated widely, including one claiming that Dakota discovered Sydney's diary a few days before the crime, revealing that Sydney had slept with her boyfriend, Chad, 2 years earlier. It is important to mention that 2 years earlier, Dakota had not met Chad, yet this might have infuriated her as Sydney's older sister. However, the romantic relationship, especially between Sydney and Chad, was never verified and was doubtful to investigators since Sydney was only 13 at the time. Although this motive wasn't confirmed, there were several other possible reasons for the murder. The following day, Dakota was called in for questioning again. She alleged that her boyfriend, Chad, who was accused of the crime, had shown disturbing behavior. He was aggressive and often lost control, attacking people frequently. It seems that he cannot avoid committing a serious crime. He had a conflict with Sydney's ex-boyfriend, Bubby. According to Chad's testimony, he heard voices urging him to attack his family. He even set their house on fire. He also allegedly shot his favorite cat, hitting it with 15 bullets. None of these claims were verified. Detectives also knew that at 10 p.m. on the night of Sydney's disappearance, Dakota called he. It's believed that the group members arrived at her house then, possibly asking Dakota to open the door or planning something before the attack. Dakota did not answer the police's questions about Sydney's murder, and it seems she is deliberately trying to mislead the investigation. As a result, she was arrested for obstruction of justice. However, at that time, the police did not have enough evidence to proceed with a trial. Chad admitted to being the leader of a gang called the City Saints, whose members followed his orders without question. This thing might have endangered Sydney's life. Chad, however, insisted that he never ordered the murder of Sydney and denied any involvement, even expressing regret over the incident. Meanwhile, Carl participated in interrogations for 2 days as the prosecution prepared for the trial. He recounted that on the night of Sydney's disappearance, he had been drinking at night. Then, Robbie, also drunk, came to see him and suggested going somewhere. Carl agreed without asking for details and to feel secure and took a .22 caliber pistol with him. Carl was very emotional during the interrogation and openly cried. This made the detectives question whether he was an accomplice to a terrible murder or no. It was possible that he went for a walk without knowing Robbie planned to kill Sydney. However, the police were skeptical about his tears, as they could be a sign of remorse or a disguise. Carl stated that they picked up James on the way and drove to the Sydney family's house. Robbie climbed over the fence and entered the house while everyone was asleep and Carl waiting outside in the car. After some time, he became worried because they were taking too long. He claimed he went inside to find his friends and leave together. The door from the courtyard was open, providing direct access to the basement where Sydney lived. The police were suspicious that the door might have been unlocked at night, especially since there were no signs of forced entry. It seemed likely that someone helped the criminals approach Sydney unnoticed. Suspicion falls on her sister, Dakota. Carl explained that when they entered the property, they noticed that Sydney had woken up due to the noise. She recognized both criminals, Robbie and James. She asked what they were doing here. Then, she tried to wake her mother and call for help. However, Robbie attacked she, although she resisted, but they overpowered her. He threw her onto the couch and tied her hands, but she fought back fiercely. He then pointed a gun at her. Likely due to the shock and injuries from the struggle, so she lost consciousness. They were aware of her mental health challenges and her history of running away from home, so they decided to make it look like she had run away again. They removed she from the house through the open door, dragged her to their car, and drove off with her to ensure she wouldn't be found. Halfway through the journey, Sydney regained consciousness and began to resist desperately. Immediately after that, one of the attackers forced her to the ground and strangled her. He kept her in that position for a long time, until she passed out again. They then took she to a river by car, but she regained consciousness again midway. During this time, they claimed that she expressed a desire for intimacy, and they had had intimate relations with her. And the strangulation may have been part of a perverted game. Subsequently, Sydney was shot in anger and thrown into the water. However, this testimony of incident was met with disbelief. It was obvious that the intimate intercourse was not of her own volition. Robbie presented a different account to the police. He stated that Carl played a significant role in torturing the girl. Carl had previously been in a brief 3-day relationship with she, but then she broke up with him because he didn't care about her, after which she began seeing someone else. Afterward, he vowed to take revenge on all the girls who betrayed him, starting with Sydney. At that time, no one expected his anger to lead things so far. Robbie, the youngest in the group, at just 15, insisted that he hadn't harmed anyone. As a new member, he simply followed the others and did what they told him, staying within the boundaries of what was allowed. On October 5, 2012, Chad's group members disclosed new information about the case. The police finally gathered enough evidence to build a full case and charge the group members. That day, they questioned Dakota to understand how the door to Sydney's room could have been left open at night. It's known that due to her mental illness, she could pose a danger to herself. Her mother ensured that she couldn't leave by keeping the door always locked. Sydney was under house arrest during all of this. It became evident that the incident was neither accidental nor mistaken because her mother and Dakota were meant to supervise every evening. During questioning, the police were able to get Dakota to confess. She admitted she left the door open, intending to play a prank on her sister, coordinated with members of the group. Finally, the police obtained this long-hidden confession. Later, Dakota disclosed another crucial detail. Before the crime, she had a meeting with Chad's team members, where they discussed their plans. She admitted they intended to kill Sydney. With this information, everything became clear. Even if Dakota didn't directly participate in the murder of Sydney, she was aware of it and did nothing to prevent it. She knew what was going to happen, so leaving the door unlocked wasn't accidental. She planned it to allow the attackers to enter the house and killed Sydney. Investigators believe Dakota underwent a brutal ordeal to join Chad's group, which explained her aided the killers. Her cheerful behavior at her younger sister's funeral was because she completed the ritual to join the group and get rid of her annoying younger sister. Then, their group celebrated after the murder. Carl later acknowledged his guilt, writing an apology letter to Sydney's mother, Tracy, on August 18, 2010. He admitted that he had done evil and now had to pay with his freedom. Even though he knew that it couldn't bring Sydney back to life, but he asked for forgiveness. Tracy read the letter and believed Carl showed no remorse. Although he was arrested early in the investigation, it took 2 years for them to appear in court. Carl Dane pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received the 60-year prison sentence. However, before being transferred to a federal prison, he was discovered dead in his cell, with a note expressing regret for his actions. Another member of the group, James, was also found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years. Robbie Mueller initially sentenced to 37 years, but his sentence was reduced to 26 years after an appeal. He will be eligible for parole in late 2023. The gang leader, Chad Bennett, cooperated with investigators and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, resulting in a 20-year sentence. He took a plea deal and will be eligible for parole in 2026. Dakota received a 26-year prison sentence, with the ability to apply for first parole by the end of 2023. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sidney Powell. Brenda Powell was born in 1969 in Saline, Agua, USA. She graduated from high school and then attended Akron University. After completing her studies, she began working as a pediatrician in the oncology department of her local children's hospital. For over 28 years, she has dedicated herself to helping sick children. Brenda oversees inpatient care and is known to her peers and hospital staff as a calm, quiet person who is exceptionally kind to both patients and their parents. In November 1996, Brenda, 27, married Stephen Powell and took his last name. They were introduced through a mutual friend who worked with her at the hospital. The couple enjoyed a happy life together for 23 years and welcomed 2 children. A daughter named Sydney and a son named Andrew. Since childhood, Sydney has been passionate about sports, especially football. Her family watched football together every Sunday, which helped strengthen their relationship. They also regularly visited the beach and Disneyland. As Sydney grew older, she and her mother, Brenda, began to spend more time together. While her father and brother watched football, they enjoyed shopping, which further strengthened their relationship. Sydney did well in high school, which helped her pass her exams and gain admission to Mount Union University, where she also received a scholarship. In college, she became friends with Lauren and a group of female students while living on campus. She participated in school events and was introduced to many different activities. Friends described Sydney as friendly and easygoing. Sydney's academic journey took an unexpected turn after her first year. Initially, everything seemed fine. She excelled in her classes and was praised by her teachers, ranking among the top students. Sydney began working part-time during the summer holidays to earn extra money. However, during her second year, Sydney faced significant challenges and decided to move off campus. Her friends were initially confused by this sudden decision, but later learned that Sydney was struggling academically. Her grades were dropping. Additionally, Sydney began sleeping excessively, often around 16 hours a day. Sydney's friends thought she could handle it all because she was a smart and hardworking student who had previously done well in school. Unfortunately, Sydney struggled and ended up failing 3 out of 4 exams. Due to strict regulations, she received a notice of expulsion from the university, which shocked everyone. Sydney was worried and shared her concerns with her friends. Fortunately, they informed her that she could reapply for admission. At the beginning of 2020, Sydney resumed her studies, attending classes and sorority meetings. She happily told her friends that she had been readmitted to the university and was doing well. In early February, Sydney was notified that she had to leave the school permanently and that her expulsion would remain in effect. She was offered assistance with moving and packing, and the school planned to notify her parents of her situation to help cover her expenses. However, Sydney told the school administration that her family already knew and did not need to be contacted. This was not true, and she was afraid that her parents would find out about her expulsion. During this time, she told her parents that she was doing well in school and had good grades, and that she had even won a scholarship. Her parents trusted her and had no reason to doubt her. After being evicted from campus, Sydney left but did not return home before the end of February. Instead, she stayed with friends in various hotels, paying in cash to avoid being tracked and to keep her situation at the university a secret. Although she worked part-time to support herself, her earnings were insufficient. Sydney constantly searched for online opportunities to make money but could not find a full-time job that would provide adequate support. She continued to live in hotels or with friends, afraid to go home. She cut back on everything and often did not eat enough. Eventually, she decided to return home, claiming that the campus was closed for renovations. She told her parents that she would stay with them while she went to college and still work. Her parents believed her and thought everything was fine. Sydney has been lying to her mother by saying that she is fine. Recently, Brenda has noticed some strange changes in her daughter's behavior. She discovers that Sydney is spending more time at home and not going to school, which raises concerns. This information later comes to light because Sydney's entire family uses the Life 360 app, a mobile phone location tracking app on a map for safety, allowing family members to know where each other are. On February 25, 2020, Brenda received a notification from the app that Sydney had stayed home all day instead of coming to college as scheduled. This worried Brenda, who was concerned that something was wrong. She contacted her daughter to find out what was going on. Sydney replied that she had a week off because her teacher was absent. She mentioned that students were given assignments to complete at home and were participating in remote learning. However, Brenda began to doubt Sydney's story. She told her daughter that her explanations did not seem right and reminded her of the importance of good grades to maintain her scholarship and graduate, which would affect her future job opportunities. She also emphasized the importance of attending school regularly. Sydney then reassured her mother that everything was fine and that she should not worry. The deception continued. On March 2nd, Sydney texted her mother, saying she was going to school and would be back by 2:30 p.m. Instead, she spent time with a friend, watching TV, while lying about her college situation. During this time, the parents noticed that something was wrong. Their daughter did not receive the scholarship, so her father, Stephen, had to pay her tuition. He tried to send money through the payment gateway, but could not complete the transaction because he had lost access to his account. Initially, he suspected a technical problem and decided to wait. However, when Stephen logged in on March 3rd while working at a metallurgical plant, he was still unable to complete the transaction. He then asked his daughter about the problem. Sydney reassured him not to worry and promised that she would look into the matter and resolve it. Stephen realized he could not delay any longer as the deadline was near, and he needed to pay for his daughter's studies quickly. He decided to contact the university himself to resolve the situation. When he called, the staff checked their records and informed him that Sydney was not listed as a student, meaning her access had been revoked. Stephen was shocked and thought there must be some mistake. He requested they verify the information again, and they confirmed that Sydney had indeed been expelled. However, the university staff would not disclose the date of her expulsion, citing confidentiality rules. Stephen used a tracking app to locate Sydney, who was supposed to be in class. Instead, he discovered she was at home while he was at work. He wanted to go home to talk to her, but he feared she might track his movements and run away. To avoid this, he left his phone at work and headed home. Before leaving, he called Sydney to gather information, but she avoided giving clear answers. During the conversation, she admitted that she was struggling at university and didn't like it there. However, she continued to lie, not confessing that she had been expelled a long time ago. Instead, she claimed she had just not been attending classes. Stephen was troubled by his daughter's situation. He believed she was capable and had a bright future ahead, but he worried that her lack of commitment to attending classes could hinder her progress. He wanted to talk to her about the issue so they could find a solution together. On his way to work, Stephen called Brenda to inform her about their daughter's learning difficulties. Although Brenda suspected something was wrong, she hoped it was not true. Throughout the call, Stephen was concerned about Sydney's situation. However, Brenda reassured him. With a background in psychology, she had a skill for helping others and wanted to use her experience to support their daughter. She promised Stephen that she would take time off work, go home, and have a calm and open discussion with Sydney to ensure that they could all make the best decision together. Brenda then tried to contact the school but was unsuccessful. She left a voicemail asking for a call back and then went home. When Brenda reached her private entrance, she told her husband what had happened and went inside. Meanwhile, teachers Michelle and John received Brenda's message and called her back within the hour. At approximately 12:36 p.m., Brenda answered the phone and spoke calmly to the teachers. Everything seemed normal until Brenda started screaming into the phone, followed by a series of noises. Michelle and John, who were listening on speakerphone, were confused about what was happening but sensed that something was wrong. Michelle and John were worried about what had happened and tried calling Brenda again, but she did not answer. After several tries, a woman finally picked up at 12:40 p.m., but it wasn't Brenda. The teachers recognized Sydney's voice and asked to speak to her mother, but the call suddenly ended. This situation made Michelle and John suspicious. They decided to contact the local police to check on Brenda. Police officer Kenneth Diss, a friend of Brenda's family, heard the call and was extremely concerned about the alarming situation. He personally called Stephen to ask what was going on at their house, but Stephen could not provide any information because he was not home. After thinking for a moment, Stephen recalled that Sydney and Brenda were supposed to be at home discussing their study problems. He suspected there might have been a conflict between his wife and daughter. But he couldn't imagine the reality of the situation. Stephen then rushed home and called his daughter, Sydney, to find out what was going on. Sydney reassures him that everything is fine and the atmosphere seems calm. However, when Stephen tells her that the police are on their way, Sydney suddenly becomes hysterical. She begins to cry and reveals that a robber has broken into the house and attacked them. The call then ends abruptly. The police had already arrived at the house when Sydney dashed out, covered in blood, and screaming. She told the officers a shocking story about a robber who had broken in and attacked her mother. She said she heard glass breaking and that her mother told her to run, so she did. Sydney then hid in a courtyard, anxiously listening. She then found her mother lying in a pool of blood and she tried to help her, which is how she got blood on her. Inside the house, officers found Brenda lying face up in a room. She was badly injured, with a bloody cast iron skillet nearby and a kitchen knife on the floor. Despite the broken glass, officers began to doubt Sydney's story. Her story about a robber seemed very unbelievable. An ambulance arrived quickly and took Brenda to hospital, where she was taken to the intensive care unit. Sadly, 50-year-old Brenda Powell died shortly after arriving. Sydney was also examined by paramedics, but no serious injuries were found. She was sedated, her cuts were bandaged, and she was sent home. Forensic experts who examined Brenda's body were shocked by the brutality of the attack. She had suffered a severe blow to the back of the head, which caused her scalp to detach from her skull. Additionally, she had numerous stab wounds, estimated to be between 20 and 30, mostly concentrated on her neck. There were also multiple bruises and cuts on her arms, suggesting she had tried to defend herself. A preliminary review of the situation led police to believe that Sydney's account of events was fabricated. Although Sydney was covered in blood and had several smaller cuts on her arms, they were significantly less severe than her mother's injuries. It was evident that the robbery had been staged, as nothing was taken from the house. Sydney's actions raised several questions. After her mother told her to leave the house, why didn't she run to the neighbors for help or call 911? Instead, She waited in the yard and later went back into the house without any apparent fear. None of the neighbors reported seeing a robber. The blood found on Sydney was tested and matched her mother's, including traces on the broken glass. Police sent the knife, believed to be the murder weapon, and the frying pan for analysis. Brenda's blood was found on these items, and no fingerprints or other DNA were found at the scene. It appears that Sydney injured herself when she stabbed her mother. Sydney Powell was then taken to the police station for questioning. After the initial panic subsided, she refused to answer any questions. By this time, police investigating the attack had learned about recent events in Sydney's university life. They discovered that she had been expelled a month earlier and had lied to her family about her situation, staying with friends in hotels instead. She was so afraid of disappointing those around her that she had lied not only to her parents but also to her classmates and others. Police believe that Sydney was so afraid of telling the truth that she decided to kill her mother when her mother started to suspect something was wrong. Despite this, Sydney chose to remain silent. 19-year-old Sydney Powell was arrested and charged with murdering Brenda. She also faced charges for causing serious injury and for tampering with evidence to mislead the investigation. Due to her mental health issues, she was unable to admit or deny her guilt. Her lawyer argued that she was insane, stating that Sydney had struggled with serious mental health problems since childhood. At the time of the offense, Sydney may have been experiencing a mental health crisis that affected her perception of her actions. Sydney faced several mental health issues that may have contributed to the violent incident, which led police to request a psychiatric evaluation. During the examination, Sydney spoke about her memories of that day but could only recall bits and pieces. She remembered sitting in the basement, anxious about her parents coming home after her father found out about her struggles. She also remembers her mother coming home and their conversation starting, when her mother comforted her and asked what happened at school. She wished her mother would leave her alone. Then she heard the sound of glass breaking, and then she couldn't remember anything else about what happened. Sydney informed her doctor that she had been experiencing hallucinations since she was 11 years old. She had always been very anxious, responsible, and self-critical, setting extremely high academic standards for herself. At times her anxiety became so intense that it affected her ability to concentrate on tests, leading to multiple psychological evaluations. After extensive evaluation and discussion with Sydney, the psychiatrist diagnosed her with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and depression. Sydney reported that she had recurring nightmares of her mother covered in blood. The lack of a clear motive for the murder led the psychiatrist to determine that Sydney was insane at the time of the incident. Another doctor who worked with Sydney for at least 3 to 6 months before the crime noted that her mental health had deteriorated significantly. She started losing touch with reality and began failing her exams, which ultimately led to her expulsion from university. Her condition was worsened by extreme self-criticism. She couldn't accept that she had failed. Sydney was also afraid to confess her struggles to her parents. However, the truth eventually came out, causing her immense stress. This culminated in a psychotic breakdown that resulted in her mother's murder. After her arrest, Sydney's bail was initially set at $250,000 but was later raised to $500,000. One of her relatives posted bail, allowing her to await her trial outside of custody. During this time, she received treatment for her mental health issues and felt significantly better by the time the hearings began. Sydney eventually regained her composure. After Sydney saw Brenda talking to college teachers, she knew that her mother would soon hear the truth from them. In a psychotic state, she attacked her mother. Teachers at the college heard the beginning of the attack. During the trial, her friends and relatives confirmed that they did not notice any significant changes in her behavior leading up to the crime. Although she was upset about being expelled, she was generally cheerful and sociable. The only noticeable difference was that she began sleeping more. The defense acknowledged that Sydney killed her mother but maintained that she was insane at the time. However, many experts disagreed with the psychiatrist's diagnosis. What everyone agreed on was that she suffered from borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by stubbornness, mood swings, and self-destructive behavior. In addition, signs of hallucinations were reported by Sydney to a psychiatrist when she was 11. There was no evidence in the medical records to support Sydney's claims, which undermined the defense's strategy. Several former friends mentioned that Sydney had exhibited unusual behavior even during her school years. One teacher recalled when Sydney was so nervous that she couldn't read anything on a test. However, teacher didn't realize that Sydney's anxiety could indicate mental health issues, so teacher didn't tell anyone. This type of anxiety continued into college, which may have contributed to Sydney failing her exams and eventually being expelled. While awaiting trial, Sydney lived with her grandmother and was prescribed medication to treat her mental health issues. The medication list and dosage were changed several times to find the most effective combination. Sydney's health improved significantly, and she shared any positive changes with her doctor. Her father also noticed the improvement and admitted that Sydney had a strong bond with her mother and loved her deeply. He believed that if Sydney had been in a healthy state of mind, she would never have harmed her mother. Throughout the trial, Sydney cried continuously and she expressed remorse for her actions. On September 18, 2023, the jury deliberated. Sydney Powell was found guilty on all counts. Sydney was sentenced to life in prison but will be eligible for parole after 15 years. Sydney and her attorney were unhappy with the sentence and planned to appeal the court's decision. Hi everyone. Thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Marlene Oakes. Marlene was born in December 1954 to her parents Lorraine and Billy. At the age of 16, she married a much older man, Bill Major, who was 26 at the time. Despite the large age difference, they quickly got along. The same year they got married, they welcomed their first son, Donald. 4 years later, they had a daughter named Lalana. The family lived in Verona, a small town in the suburbs of Kentucky, USA. Verona is located near downtown Cincinnati. Bill worked as an auto mechanic, and according to Marlene's father, he was ambitious and had a great ability to persuade others. This gave him a big advantage in his job. His auto repair shop was located near the interstate. A convenient location helps him always have many customers. At that time, Marlene was a housewife, taking care of the children, while Bill was the main breadwinner for the family. However, their marriage was not a happy one. They argued frequently, and Bill often abused his wife. One day, a man named Glenn St. Hilaire arrived in town and quickly befriended Bill. He began working at Bill's shop, handling a variety of tasks. Originally from Canada, Glenn owned welding equipment and had extensive knowledge of cars, thus becoming a valuable assistant to Bill. He lives in a trailer near Bill's house, and eventually, he and Marlene developed feelings for each other. After that, they had an affair with each other. Bill was always at work, which gave Glenn and Marlene the freedom to meet. Marlene felt drawn to Glenn, who was younger, calmer, and made her feel at ease. By October 1980, Marlene was 25 years old, while Bill was 35. He frequently resorted to violence against her, keeping the entire family in a state of fear. In this stressful situation, it is not surprising that she sought comfort from Glenn. At the time, Donald was 8 years old and Lalana was 4. Strangely, Bill not only tolerated her relationship with Glenn, but even encouraged it. Those close to the family were aware of the situation and found it shocking. However, events soon took a tragic turn. On the afternoon of October 11, 1980, Bill and Marlene had a big argument in their backyard, and the neighbors could hear it clearly. Later that evening, Bill took his children, Donald and Lalana, to a neighbor's house, asking them to care for the kids for a day due to serious family issues. He told the neighbors that Marlene had run off with Glenn and that he needed time to process everything. The neighbors, however, knew that he was enraged over Marlene's relationship with Glenn. He beat her and the children because of it, and her car was missing. However, no matter Bill's explanation, no one could believe that Marlene, a mother who is wholeheartedly devoted to her children, can leave her children. Afterward, Bill contacted the police and repeated the same story he had shared with the neighbors. However, the details didn't quite add up. Marlene's friends insisted that she deeply loved her children and would never abandon them. They also revealed that she was angry at he because of his abusive behavior. She confided in them that Bill had threatened to kill her if she left him to live with Glenn. A close friend of his even heard him describe in detail how he would kill her if she defied him. He had talked about dismembering her body and hiding the remains so thoroughly that they would never be found. Glenn, Marlene's lover, once heard Bill confess that he would attack her, decapitate her, and destroy her teeth so that the police could not identify her through dental records. Marlene began to fear that her plan to move in with Glenn could put her life in serious danger. In her diary, she wrote that Bill would only agree to sign divorce papers if she promised not to report his abuse of her and the children to the authorities. She was in a difficult position, not knowing what to do. She was exhausted by the toxic relationship and wanted to escape her controlling husband, but she was terrified of the fallout. Despite this, the police launched an investigation into her disappearance. She was officially declared a missing person. She was described as a petite woman with blonde hair and glasses. At the time she went missing, she had been wearing jeans and a blue-green checkered shirt. Her car was also reported missing. On October 11, 1980, Marlene called her sister to talk about the problems in her marriage. She was looking for advice, but her sister didn't know how to help. She said she planned to file for divorce and fight for full custody of her children. She also shared another reason for her decision. Bill had been harassing their 8-year-old son, Donald. She felt very scared and could not bear it. She warned Bill to never touch the children again and threatened to kill him if he did. This made he furious. Marlene confided to her sister that she had evidence of Bill's abuse of Donald and had hidden it in a safe place where he could not find it. She assured her that if anything happened to her, the evidence would be turned over to the police. Later that day, she called her sister again, but this time she sounded very distressed. She had just had another argument with Bill. Marlene then gave Glenn her diary, which contained all the important incident. She told him that if she ever went missing, detectives could find answers in the pages of her diary. She also told her sister the same thing during their phone call. That was the last time her family ever heard from her. On the night of October 11, Glenn arrived at Bill's house after midnight and found the area around the trailer in disarray. Around 3 a.m., he encountered Bill and asked about Marlene. Bill claimed that Marlene had run away. However, he found this hard to believe. He had recently seen she, and she had no intention of leaving her kids behind. He knew she was a mother who was always devoted to her children, so she would never abandon them. It soon became clear to everyone that Bill was lying. During this time, the children had actually been staying with neighbors. He was the one who brought them there and told them that Marlene had run away with a lover. His story was riddled with contradictions, and he kept changing his account. Then, when Bill arrived at his neighbor's house, he even handed over all of his weapons to them to take care of the children, including a 9mm handgun and a .22 caliber rifle. He also sold his tractor to another neighbor, explaining that he was moving to live closer to his parents. A few days after Marlene's disappearance, Bill went to the police station to report the incident. He said that after an argument at home, she had left, and he was convinced that she had run away with her lover. Following this, Glenn also contacted the police and provided information about the conflicts in the relationship between Marlene and Bill. He handed over to the police everything related to Marlene, including the diaries she had left with him. These diaries contained clues that were detrimental to Bill. Glenn also recounted Bill's unusual behavior after Marlene's disappearance. According to him, Bill's transfer of weapons to neighbors and the sale of valuable assets were very suspicious. This showed that Bill seemed to be planning to run away. He believed that Bill was involved in Marlene's disappearance. After speaking with Glenn, the police began investigating Marlene's case more thoroughly. They believed that she did not simply run away from her husband, Bill, but that the matter may be more serious. It is very likely that one of the two men, Bill or Glenn, was involved in this disappearance. Bill and Glenn were both considered prime suspects in the case. However, both denied any involvement. Glenn was cooperative and willingly shared all the information he had with the police. Bill, on the other hand, gave conflicting testimony and behaved strangely during a polygraph test, makes him more suspicious. At this time, the police reviewed Marlene's diary, which details the motive for the crime and even hints at what Bill may have done to her. However, there was still not enough evidence to charge Bill with murder. No evidence or trace of the incident was found in the trailer, the area surrounding the vehicle, or at the auto repair shop. The police spoke to Marlene's children, Donald and Lalana. They paid particular attention to 8-year-old Donald, hoping he might be able to provide some information, especially considering the contents of Marlene's diary. However, the boy was too frightened, making it extremely difficult to gather any information from him. Lalana was not questioned at all because she was too young. Although Donald did not reveal anything useful, but Bill violently beat him after learning about the police interviews. Around the same time, he also began abusing his 4-year-old daughter, Lalana, treating her cruelly. He often took the children to his workplace, where he continued to abuse them. The police also questioned Marlene's sister, who firmly rejected the idea that Marlene would abandon her family and children to be with her lover. According to her sister, she had planned to divorce Bill amicably, gain custody of the children, and then start a new life with Glenn. She has no intention of running away to avoid her problems. At that time, it was known that Marlene had disappeared with the car without taking any personal belongings. But even assuming that she had run away, why would she leave all her important belongings at home, including her wallet, driver's license, money, and jewelry? Furthermore, she did not bring the medications that her doctor had just prescribed. This medication was essential for her, making it unlikely she would leave without it. All of these details did not fit the theory that she had left on her own. Despite extensive investigation, no clues were found. Investigators continued questioning everyone who knew the family. During a conversation with the police, Bill admitted he no longer believed Marlene was alive, which raised suspicions. He also began agreeing with her sister and Glenn that it was unlikely she would have abandoned all her belongings and disappeared without leaving any message. After Marlene disappears, Bill begins to tell Donald and Lalana the whole truth about her relationship, detailing her encounters with her lover, Glenn. He seemed intent on turning the children against their mother. He accused her of drug use, abusing alcohol, and even selling her body. He claimed she had left because she didn't love them anymore. Donald and Lalana grew up thinking that their mother, Marlene, was a troubled person and had abandoned them. This left a deep wound in their souls. They could not understand why she abandoned them. They had no choice but to stay with their father, Bill, who raised them harshly. Lalana later recalled that after her mother's disappearance, Bill became a tyrant. He frequently subjected she and Donald to physical and emotional abuse. On one occasion, he hit Donald so severely that the boy couldn't walk for several days. While the police were still investigating, Bill decided to sell all of his assets, including his home and auto repair shop. He then moved with his children to East Providence, Rhode Island, to be closer to his parents. There, he bought a trailer and stabilized life. The decision to move into a trailer was unusual. Bill gave up a comfortable lifestyle and a successful store in exchange for much more difficult living circumstances. His new home was considered unfavorable and not the best place to raise young children. A year after Marlene's disappearance, he remarried. His new wife was named Pauline. For a long time, they lived together but could not officially marry, because Bill could not legally end his marriage with Marlene. Eventually, he managed to file for divorce and married Pauline. Meanwhile, Glenn stayed in Verona. He found work at a local factory and was one of the few people, along with Marlene's family, who continued to search for answers about her disappearance. He frequently visited the police station to check on the investigation. The police were not only searching for Marlene but also for her car, yet no leads were found. They sent her dental records and other information to nearby cities and states, hoping for a breakthrough. Although the search is still ongoing, there is no sign that Marlene is dead. Police speculate that she have wanted to leave her current life behind to start anew somewhere else. On November 29, 1981, a hunter discovered a partial skull in the woods, a few miles from the old trailer park where Bill's family had lived. The bone was heavily damaged and showed marks from the object that had severed it from the body. For many years, the police were unable to identify the victim. All they could determine was that the bone belonged to a white woman, under 30 years old. There were signs of dismemberment, and the cause of death was determined to be multiple gunshot. As the years passed, Bill continued to live with Pauline, but his treatment of Donald and Lalana became increasingly cruel. At one point, Lalana became so desperate that she confided in her stepmother Pauline, telling her about the abuse. She revealed that Bill had molested Donald and then raped her, threatening to kill them if they spoke out. Pauline was furious when she learned the truth and could not keep quiet. She confronted Bill, warning him that if he did it again, she would call the police. For a while, Bill promised to control himself. By 1985, Bill and Pauline had a child together. By this time, Marlene had been missing for 13 years. Lalana once again confides in Pauline about Bill's harassment. This time, Pauline reported the incident to the police. Bill was arrested, and his children, Donald and Lalana, admitted that they had prayed that he would not return home. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes. After his release, he lost interest in his family. Pauline ended their relationship immediately after his arrest, but she refused to take care of his children, Donald and Lalana. Eventually, they went to live with their maternal grandmother, that is, Marlene's mother. At this point, Lalana asked her grandmother why her mother abandoned her and Donald. The grandmother replied that Marlene abandoned the children only because Bill killed Marlene. She firmly believed he was involved in Marlene's disappearance, though there was no concrete evidence to prove it. After his release from prison, Bill began a relationship with a woman named KLR. He concealed his dark past from her, claiming he had been imprisoned for armed robbery. He did not want her to know about the abuse he had inflicted on his children. The two married and lived happily for a while. However, in 1995, Bill suffered a stroke and became confined to a wheelchair. By then, Lalana was an adult and capable of handling matters on her own. She decided to look into the disappearance of her mother, Marlene. The first step she took was buying a notebook to document all the clues. She then approached Bill and pleaded with him to disclose the location of her mother's remains so that she could provide her with a proper burial. Lalana even promised him that if he told her the truth, she won't report to the police. However, Bill outright refused and told her that if she thought he would reveal where he hid her mother's body, she was crazy. Despite her attempts to persuade him, he remained uncooperative. Understanding that Bill would not help, Lalana launched her own investigation. She began speaking with relatives, close friends, and acquaintances who might have information about her mother, Marlene. During her search, she learned that her mother had kept a diary where she documented significant events in her life. She also discovered that the police had confiscated the diary as evidence back in 1980. She managed to obtain permission to review her mother's case file, including the diary entries. What she read left her deeply shocked. Marlene's diary revealed that she was aware of Bill's abuse of their son, Donald. She also discovered that Bill had been convicted in 1975 for molesting 2 young boys. After learning this, she wrote that all her feelings for her husband, Bill, had vanished. She demanded that he never touch their child again. The diary detailed Bill's erratic behavior and threats, including his frequent boasts about knowing how to commit the perfect crime. He claimed that to avoid identification, one would need to remove all the victim's teeth. Marlene also expressed her plans to file for divorce and seek full custody of her children. In one of her final diary entries, Marlene wrote that she had threatened Bill with divorce, cut off contact between him and his children. He did not want that to happen, but not out of love for them. In 2000, Lalana contacted the police and shared the information from Marlene's diaries. This prompted the police to re-examine the diaries and immediately question Bill and Donald. Donald provided detailed accounts of Bill's cruelty. Lalana also learned that, sometime after Marlene's disappearance, a skull had been discovered in a forested area near their old house. She located the exact spot and visited it herself, hoping to uncover more evidence, but her search was unsuccessful. The police had an important piece of evidence, a skull that had no teeth, which matched what Bill had said about the perfect crime. At the time, identification of remains relied heavily on dental records, as modern identification technology was not available. When experts tried traditional DNA testing, they discovered severe bone damage, making analysis impossible. So they turned to newer technology, specifically mitochondrial DNA analysis. However, the county refused to pay the $120 cost of the study, as it was not certain that it would help the case. Lalana had to raise money to pay for the procedure. For this, she organized a small fund. At that time, such research was conducted only in one laboratory in the United States. The amount of money needed to be raised was huge, but her family were enthusiastic in supporting her. For example, her family members contributed their entire savings to cover the cost of the analysis. Finally, she earned enough money. County forensic experts took DNA samples from Donald and Lalana to compare with the DNA from the skull that was found. The results showed that the skull did indeed belong to Marlene, who had been missing. This confirmed the suspicions of her children and relatives that she had been murdered. Bill learned about the discovery of the skull. Bill's father called the police to report that his son had killed Marlene. According to his account, Bill had attacked her, then dismembered her body and scattered the body parts far apart. To prevent identification, Bill destroyed the upper and lower jaws. Bill also submerged her car in the river, and he also informed the authorities of its location. When they tried to recover the car, they encountered many difficulties due to the strong river currents, which may have pushed the car far from its original location. They tried draining the river and used experienced divers, but the search was complicated. Investigators decided to enlist Bill's father's help in gathering more evidence against Bill. They instructed him to call Bill, get a confession during the conversation, and record it. To unnerve Bill, they tell Bill about an investigation initiated by Lalana. Upon hearing that his daughter was looking for Marlene, Bill became enraged and told her to stop looking and forget about her mother. Bill believed the case had long been closed and that he was no longer at risk. Nevertheless, During the recorded phone call, he confessed to the crime. On July 25, 2001, Bill Major was arrested and charged with the murder of Marlene. During the interrogation, Bill admitted to the crime but attempted to place the blame on his wife, Marlene. He claimed they were in her car when she pulled out a gun and began threatening him. According to Bill, a struggle broke out, during which he accidentally attacked her several times. He claimed that there were 2 bullets in her head and 4 in her body. However, this testimony seems more like intentional than accidental in a fight. The trial started in 2003, when Bill was 59 years old. After suffering a stroke in 1995, he had lost the ability to walk and appeared in court in a wheelchair. During the trial, his children, Donald and Lalana, testified about the abuse and violence they endured during their childhood. They recounted what happened inside the family trailer. Bill's lawyer argued that his actions were linked to nervous tension, claiming that Marlene frequently threatened him, leading to emotional breakdowns. The defense also argued that the murder was an act of self-defense. After a lengthy argument from the defense attorney, Bill looked at his children and smiled, clearly satisfied with the attorney's presentation. He was confident he would remain a free man. However, Lalana smiled back at her father and expressed her hope that he would spend the rest of his life in prison for what he had done to them and to Marlene. After deliberating for over 40 minutes, the jury found Bill Major guilty of Marlene's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. On December 7, 2016, Bill applied for parole, but his request was denied. He died in prison on October 15, 2020. Lalana was satisfied with the outcome of the investigation. She had spent much of her life pursuing justice. She believes that Bill murdered Marlene at that time because he suspected Marlene's of having an affair. She believes that Bill meticulously planned the murder out of fear of going to jail and wanting to maintain control over his children, which would allow him to continue to torment them. Notably, Bill's children, Donald and Lalana, refused to take their father's last name. Lalana later changed it to her husband's. She regrets that during her childhood, she was influenced by her domineering father, causing her to mistakenly believe that her mother had abandoned her. The rest of Marlene's body and her car were never found. However, her family took solace in the fact that justice had been served. Only her mutilated skull was buried.